Okay, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. I was told that Representative Gray could attend by Zoom. So if he's on, he can join. Okay, continuation, second day of our meeting. I don't know, there's a few folks that are associated with WIDA, and they had held a reception for the legislature last night. I appreciate the legislators that had time to go. You know, local economic development is so important in that group. Are very excited about what they do, and it's fun to hear from them and hear that they're always looking forward and trying to find out what's best for the state of Wyoming, much like everybody in this room. And with that, something that I've been very passionate about is carbon capture, utilization, sequestration. I've been, along with a co-chair in Representative Burkhart, among others, big supporters of SER. And so, Dr. Kretka, you're up, and please knock it out of the park for us.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Co-Chair. Thank you all for having me today. I'm Holly Kretka, Executive Director of the University of Wyoming School of Energy Resources. I do have some slides I think we're going to have brought up that I would love to run through, and just thank you all so much for your support. And we also share your passion for CCUS. It's one of the reasons that I wanted to come to the School of Energy Resources, because the team there has literally decades of experience working on this. And in my mind, this is the place to be if you want to make a difference in CCUS. So not just the school, but the state. So I will start on my slides. So moving to slide 2, at the School of Energy Resources, our mission is energy-driven economic development for Wyoming. And if you will so allow me, I would like to deviate from the CCUS topic just momentarily at the request of some members of the committee to talk about another project that also falls within our mission, and that is our carbon engineering program, which has been largely supported by the state, and we are developing new uses for Wyoming coal, and one of those uses is construction materials. And so I brought some show and tell for those who haven't been able to see it in our building. So I have one brick that is derived from Wyoming PRB coal and one traditional clay brick. And so at our whole program, we're focused on very high volume applications. So things like construction materials that can amount to millions of tons per year of coal consumption, versus other universities that look at this topic often look at things like carbon fibers or carbon nanotubes, which are exciting, but very small applications would not make a difference in the Powder River Basin. So and we have 2 bricks. This one, you can see, you can tell the difference, because one of the things that we do when we develop these applications for PRB coal is that we know that to get into the market, we're gonna have to have something superior to incumbents. So for this, for the coal-derived materials, it's lighter, so you'll be able to fill that. It's also more insulative. So, and I have these in my car at the request of Representative Burkhart. So if anyone wants to take one home, you can have one, just let me know and I'll bring them up. But I couldn't actually carry the whole box in these shoes.
If anybody was gonna have you carry rocks around, it'd be Representative Burkhart.
And believe me, okay. Okay. Okay, we will get them. It's just gonna take a couple trips. No. Yes. Okay. Okay.
I've had one on my desk for a year.
Yes, sir. Yeah, we appreciate that advertisement. So, okay, well, I'll pass this one around for now if it's okay. So please listen.
Okay, go ahead. Representative Duncan has a quick question, Doctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So can these bricks be used the same exact way in a traditional brick, or can they be used in more ways than a traditional brick?
Mr. Chair and Representative Duncan, great question. So the intention is that they would be used as a drop-in replacement for conventional bricks. We have built a coal house on campus, a demonstration coal house. But one of the things that we're looking at is, after these are used for that purpose, could they be actually ground down and used for other applications? So one of the other areas we're looking at is soil amendments. so to help Wyoming's agricultural sector, and they could potentially have more lives than just the bricks, so be used for one purpose than another. We actually had, I think, about 1,000 of these stolen, and I'm still looking to see where they are in someone's yard. So I think agricultural, or I mean landscaping, might also be another application, and someone's testing it for free somewhere in Laramie. So. So yeah, I think that's our goal, is to find as many applications as possible, and that would grow the amount of coal that we're able to have used through these different applications.
Go ahead.
Holly, there's a big price differential in those. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Mr. Co-Chair. So the price difference right now, our calculations are about 40 cents or less than 40 cents per ton or per brick for the coal-derived bricks versus over $2 for the conventional. So, and it makes sense. I mean, coal, the production of coal it's cheaper than dirt, right? It's one of the least cost commodities. To meet that price goal, it requires, we have a full, what we call a coal refinery, and to meet that price point, the other part, every part of the coal has to get used. So it is incumbent on the other technologies being successful that we're focused on things like asphalt, additives. So we have to use all the pieces of the coal to meet that price, but that's what our calculations show today.
40 cents a brick?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Go ahead, Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The question has to be asked. Is it combustible?
Yeah, of course.
It's made out of coal.
You put it in
The
your
combustible.
fireplace.
And second question is energy to manufacture. Is it less or more than conventional?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Representative Heiner, that's the first question everyone asks, of course. It is not combustible. Thank you for asking. It's not combustible. So we have to do, there's like standard tests for bricks, for building materials, and it passed, I think, I'm not an expert in this, but Class A is the least combustible, and that was how this one was rated during third-party tests. And so it's not combustible, but yeah. Did you have a second question? Sorry.
How much energy?
Oh, how much energy? Sorry. So I don't know the exact amount. I just know it's less because we're not doing heat curing. So it's a lower energy input. Yeah. Okay.
Good. Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am so excited. As a Realtor, this is getting me really excited about workforce housing and affordability. So what about those that are really into green energy building and homes? What about the capabilities for all of that in terms of the you know, how we have passive solar and things like that for the different energy uses and things like that. What about this product and the capabilities of using that stored energy and such? Mm-hmm.
Mr. Chair, Representative Duncan. So these bricks are more insulative than traditional clay bricks, so that's great. They wouldn't make that big of a difference in housing because most of your insulation isn't in the external part, it's in the insulation. So for that reason, we're actually also working on like a coal-derived carbon foam that is also not flammable and could be used, and that would be our approach to insulation. So yes, they are more insulative, but that's not where your insulation properties generally are derived in housing. So, so they would help a little bit, but we're looking at other applications that would make a bigger difference.
Okay. Yeah, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you. Dr. Kurtka, I'm curious about the timeline, and I'm curious about what they can produce right now or what they are producing right now. And what the cost of a current brick is, because they obviously don't have the full development of the business model to support it. So, as well as what that timeline forward looks like for them to move towards that full implementation.
Okay. Yeah, Mr. Chair, Senator Office. So currently where we are in the whole technology platform development is we are moving forward, we're breaking ground thanks to the support from this committee and the Wyoming legislature in Campbell County, and we're breaking ground for a demonstration, so first site prep and then demonstration of the pyrolysis unit at a larger scale, so field scale, not commercial scale, but demonstration scale. And then, so the pyrolysis part of the technology, there's two parts, solvent extraction and pyrolysis. Pyrolysis is the part that's related to brick. So that will be demonstrated over the next 3 years. The bricks are the easier part. The harder part is to scale up everything around it. I don't have a number for you, like if the rest of the technology platform isn't successful, like what the cost would be. So because you would have more waste and so yeah, we would have to like develop those numbers. But then after 3 years, we still have to test the solvent extraction, not to do the bricks though. So if our intention was to scale up only the bricks, maybe we would be ready we would have the data ready to move toward the commercial scale in about 3 to 4 years. So that's our timeline, but I think it will take longer because we are trying to move forward the pyrolysis and solvent extraction process together so that we are using all the parts of that are in the coal, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Senator Roth.
Sorry, Dr. Kirk, what's kind of the production rate right now? I know it's basically bench scale. I'm just curious how many they've made, what they can make, and how it works today.
Great question. So, Mr. Chair, Senator Rothfuss, they're making these by hand today, which is one of the reasons they're so beautiful. They're like different, but so they can make hundreds in a day. But ultimately you would have to use machinery to do this. So we're using conventional approaches, conventional machinery will work. So that's not a big impediment to development.
So I have one more question and we'll move on.
Okay.
Because I don't know if this is a stated mission, but it's always been my belief. SER's goal is to research, do the impossible, right? Or find solutions, and then scale up and partner with industry for the handoff. And do you have partners that are looking at this project, or are you still just in the research stage?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, every part of our carbon engineering, every product has a commercial partner. And in particular, we're working with Atlas Carbon as well as we move forward. But yeah, every single end product has to have a commercial partner so that we even just know what tests to run to make sure we are testing industry standards. So yes.
I was hoping for that answer. Thank you. Okay, we'll let you go on with your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. And thank you, members of the committee, for letting me to talk about that topic, but there's so much going on at the school, we wanted to take the opportunity. But I do think it's a good segue. This carbon engineering program and carbon capture, use, and storage, CCUS, are the two areas at the School of Energy Resources that are most advanced in moving toward commercialization. We always have to have a pipeline, so we'll be looking at earlier stage technologies as well, but these are the ones where we're actively working, especially CCS, we are actively working to hand this technology off to the commercial side now. And I am someone who spent my career on CCUS, and I think I would speak for all of us when I say that it's different now. There's a lot more commercial interest than there has been historically. And so if you take one message away from my presentation, let it be that there has been real progress made. And I feel like the School of Energy Resources is now actively working with our partners around the state to hand off this technology and ultimately see it deployed like we've been waiting for years. So it's a really exciting time to be in this area. Okay, so moving on to slide 3.
Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry.
Representative Burkhardt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Kripke, handing this off, I imagine most of what you're doing is patentable. Am I correct?
Mr. Chair, Representative Burkhardt, some things can be, are you talking about CCUS now?
Yes.
Yes. So there's a mix. Much of what we do when we hand off is actually just sharing data that has been collected with public support, whether it be state or federal funding, and handing off data on the subsurface to commercial entities. So in CCS, I think that on the capture side, there is IP, but where SCR's historical strengths and the states have lied has been focusing on the subsurface. So there might be some areas, but mostly we're handing over information that's been collected. So not handing over licensing IP.
Mr. Chairman, follow up.
Yeah.
So the IP that is proprietary, and that is the intention that we, the state, UW, SCR, gets a return on that?
So, Mr. Chair, Representative Burkhart, any intellectual property developed at the School of Energy Resources is owned by the University of Wyoming, and we fall under their guidelines. And so the way the university policies are structured, there is a payment, I believe it's 60% to the inventors and 40% to the university, so.
And we should call them patents, right?
Yes, sure. Okay, so we're slide 3, we're working on CCUS because it contributes to supporting our fuels, our coal and our gas. And we also believe it is economic development opportunity in its own right. So there's coal-fired power plants that I'll talk about today looking at CCS projects, but there's also projects beyond that as well. It's really expanding as a field. Going to slide 4, it's always, we show this slide every time we present anywhere. This is not SCR's accomplishments. This is Wyoming's accomplishments on CCS. As I said, there's growing commercial interest in the state. And that is largely originated with the proactive nature of this committee and the Wyoming legislature. And that has led to a tremendous amount of CCS opportunity here. Just as an example, Wyoming is one of the very few states that has 2 fully characterized CO2 storage reservoirs. We have Class 6 permits under development now. That is different. So I think everyone's familiar, but just in case, Class 6 is the type of permit you need to inject CO2 for permanent storage. Wyoming.
This committee knows Class 6.
Okay, I'm just making sure. Yes, sir. It's just part of the spiel. Yes, you do. So there are Class 6 permits under development now, and it's not just the School of Energy Resources. There is a commercial application as well. So we have 2 as part of our Wyoming Carbon Safe that I'll talk about later, but there is also a commercial one that's been submitted, and we're trying to support project developers that are looking at other Class 6 applications. As you know, we have CO2 storage sites on the end of our existing CO2 pipeline. There's the Wyoming Pipeline Corridor Initiative, which has done some of the pre-work for permitting CO2 pipelines on federal lands. The CCS-friendly regulatory framework, which includes long-term stewardship. I realize you know all this, but it's worth celebrating these successes, and obviously this originated with this committee. The state has primacy for Class 6. That's going to make us be able to move more quickly than other states as when project developers are deciding, do I want to do a project in Wyoming or Texas? Hopefully that primacy is going to be helpful for us. We have our geology. We have great geology for CO2 storage, over 26 billion tons, and that's just what we've looked at to date. That's our capacity, but there's lots of other places around the state that we could do more thorough testing and increase that our estimated capacity. Obviously, we have the Wyoming Integrated Test Center, and the state of Wyoming has developed a national and international reputation in CCS. So really proud for our role in being a part of this. It all, again, starts with this committee.
Dr. Krutka, I'd add one more in
Yes, sir.
terms of is that we've statutorily defined ownership of pore space
Yes, sir.
for clear, well, you don't have to call me sir.
Yes, sir. Well, and we actually have one bullet that says CCS friendly regulatory framework, but we actually, when we go present to outside of Wyoming, we have a whole slide that has that we were the first state to do that, but there's also like 10 other bullets on that slide of all the things that have been done. So, but you already know that. So, okay. So moving on to slide 5. Just a highlight of some of the projects that we are focusing on or have focused on historically at the School of Energy Resources. Number 1 is, you can see that these span the state. Number 1 is the Wyoming Carbon Safe project, which I'll talk about later. Number 2 is the Rock Springs Uplift, which was completed previously. But that is, again, this world-class CO2 storage opportunity, and it's prolific in the amount of CO2 that can be stored. It's close to many important industries to the state, including Trona coal-fired power plants and refineries. So this is an opportunity for a large regional hub. We actually have several opportunities for that across the state of Wyoming. Number 3 is state funding has allowed SCR to look at depleted oil and gas fields for CO2 storage, and really repurposing assets in those fields. So there's wells, compression, and the reservoir is well characterized. So that's a great opportunity, and this is the general area where the industry is looking at Class 6 permit. And then number 4 is a blue hydrogen project funded by the Department of Energy. Blue hydrogen, as you know, needs CO2 storage to meet lower carbon metrics. So that's an example of how CCS is, while many of these are associated with coal-fired power plants, there are other opportunities as well. Okay, so moving on to slide 6. We want to highlight the work being done. So now moving into Basin Electric's power station, Dry Fork Power Station. This is one of the newest power plants in the country. It has all the bells and whistles in terms of environmental retrofits. Well, not retrofit, it was built with them. Environmental technologies. It has about 3.3 million tons of CO2 per year, zero water discharge, really a great power plant, and we've been really honored to work with Basin Electric on our Carbon Safe project. It is the home of the Integrated Test Center as well. And if you move to slide 7, I'm sure you're all aware that there is a 10 megawatt large scale pilot of a novel membrane carbon capture technology being tested at the Integrated Test Center. This is exciting just because over time, we want to see CCUS deployed now, but over time, we also want to see the costs come down. They're going to come down in 2 ways. One is by learning by doing, so taking the technologies that exist, deploying them, having economies of scale. The other is by novel technologies, and this is one. And so this is another example of how by offering this spot, Basin Electric in the state of Wyoming is helping to bring costs down for applying carbon capture at these coal-fired power plants. So really exciting that this technology is getting tested there. And now that some of these technologies are getting scaled up. So when I started my career, I remember this technology was it was at like technology readiness level 2. It was just an idea, and they've tested membranes and they've built out the skids and tested at small scale, and now they're ready for 10 megawatt. And then this is modular. So the next step after their tests at the Integrated Test Center would be, if not large demonstration, then full scale. So this is really exciting development there. So moving on to slide 8, I'll talk a little bit about.
Yeah, go ahead.
Dr. Kretka, whose membrane is that?
So it's a company called Membrane Technology Research. They're based out of, I think it's Palo Alto. It's California somewhere.
Okay, great,
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah. Petra Nova?
Yeah. So yeah, go ahead. I have a question a little bit later on. So
Okay. Okay. That's very
Oh,
suspenseful.
gray matter don't work like it used to.
Okay. On slide 8, I have a little bit more information about the Wyoming Carbon Safe project, and we have quite a few partners in this, including, of course, Basin Electric. Appreciate state cost share that's been provided for this project. And so we're designing a CO2 storage site, commercial scale CO2 storage site. So it has to accept, this is under the DOE program, a minimum of 2 million tons a year and a minimum total of 50 million tons of CO2. We think the storage reservoir is larger than that, but that's the program minimums. We're focused on optimizing stacked storage. So you see you can target multiple locations for CO2 storage designated in yellow. There are 2 wells now completed, so steel in the ground, completed to Class 6 standards under this program. So these are no longer paper studies, and this is what I'm trying to emphasize, that this technology is moving forward. These are the first 2 wells in Wyoming completed to Class 6 standards that at least I'm aware of. And they were completed, and we have done interference testing under our Class 1 permits, and now those can be converted to Class 6. So
Yeah, go ahead, Representative Burkhardt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Kutka, there were construction problems with one of the wells. Have those all been resolved? I think they occurred last winter.
yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Burkhardt. So what happened in the Carbon Safe program is that the first well was drilled but not completed under a previous phase, and the well was left open. And then when our team went in to finish the well, some of the well had caved, and we had an unsuccessful fishing expedition to recover recover some well casing. But that is actually a problem that several of the Carbon Safe projects had, because it had to do with how the projects were phased, that you just can't leave wells open like that for that long. So I think the Department of Energy structured the program, and that led to some of the challenges. I wouldn't say it has anything to do with SCR, and I think several of the projects had that issue. But for example, the well that we drilled and completed all at once was only 1,000 feet away and was successful. So the answer is, yeah, the wells are fine. What you'll see is PRB1, which is the one that was drilled first and had the issues, and is a little bit shorter, so it doesn't go quite as deep. So it stops at 8,450 feet, whereas the other one's 9,740. And so, but that still allows us to access the storage targets that we're after. So we'll say I gave our team quite the winter break too. But so it just has to do with how the program was designed, in my.
Senator Cooper could have fished it out.
Well. Okay. Thank you, Chair. Senator Cooper, we'll call you next time, but we don't plan on ever doing that again, so. Okay, so both through the design of our the well placement, the testing, and the permitting, we're trying to provide a template that we could offer to other to commercial developers to create an actual storage hub. And we're finalizing site-specific lessons learned in permitting. I'd say no one wants to be first, so we're trying to reduce some of the barriers. You know, even though we have primacy here, going through the process the first time is always more difficult than the second. So we're trying to use our efforts to reduce the time for subsequent commercial developers, although there is one commercial developer in front of us. So
Dr. Kutka, at this time, I want to ask a question, and I know you know the answer to this because we've talked about it, but with Petra Nova facility stood up outside of Houston and ran for, can't remember, but it was operational for about 5 years, I want to say, and then shut down. And you know, so that's a question that's always brought up, is that, okay, this isn't feasible. It's been tried in the United States, and it was shut down. Could you go through some of the factors that maybe affected that Petra Nova project that don't exist in Wyoming?
yes, a wonderful question, Mr. Chairman. So this is something near and dear to my heart, because at its face, that could be an argument. The Petra Nova project could be an argument, as people have used it against CCUS. I wholeheartedly reject that. So let me give you some of the reasons why. Number one, first of all, I think Petra Nova, in terms of the carbon capture, the goal was to demonstrate the technology on a coal-fired power plant at scale. It did. And now the technology supplier, which is Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, says that because of the data they collected and their experience, they could offer that technology at significantly lower costs, up to 20% lower costs, and lower energy penalty. That's what Department of Energy projects are supposed to do. They're supposed to bring down the costs and demonstrate technologies. Okay, so that's number one. However, it was intended to run for longer than it did. The issue with that specific project, it was tied to one oil field with enhanced oil recovery, and the oil field did not perform as projected or modeled. Wyoming has a long history of enhanced oil recovery. So saying that carbon capture won't work because one enhanced oil recovery project didn't produce as expected is not, it's totally two different issues. And so one of the things that we can do, though, to mitigate that kind of risk is not tie carbon capture projects to only one storage site or only one EOR facility, but really create hubs, create an integrated network. And we fortunately here already have some of the infrastructure built out with the CO2 pipelines to be able to do that. So that would also allow you to swing. If oil prices are really high, you're going to inject more into enhanced oil recovery. If oil prices plummet, then you can inject more into CO2 storage. So it gives you some flexibility in your operating, in addition to mitigating some of the technical risks.
Yeah, go ahead, Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually have two questions. I'll just let you answer the first one. I'll go on to the second one if it's all right with the
Go
chairman.
ahead.
Dr. Krutka, it's my understanding that we have to have this CO2 that's coming off the stack 97% pure or better before we can compress it. That's the technology block that we have to surpass before we're really able to move forward with this type of technology. Can you tell me, has there been advancements on that piece as far as getting it to the 97% pure so that we can compress it and sequester it?
Yeah, yes, Mr. Chair, Representative Bear. Yes, the CO2 capture technologies that exist today, for example, the one used at Petra Nova, are able to get to the purity needed for CO2 injection. They can offer commercial guarantees both on the amount of CO2 removed as well as the purity of CO2. So that is achievable today.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I guess it was my understanding, maybe it's a misunderstanding, that at the scale that we have, for instance, at Dry Fork, that we're not able to do that yet. There was a technology that we were working on scrubbers, not scrubbers, but a membrane that would help purify that. And the last I knew, that wasn't really quite completed yet. Is that accurate?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Representative Bear. So there is a new technology. So there are incumbent technologies that can achieve the CO2 purity needed, but then the technology that you're referring to, which is the MTR technology, is being tested at the Integrated Test Center, is being tested at the large pilot scale to demonstrate that they can achieve, I think they're targeting 70% capture from the coal-fired power plant, but everyone has to meet the purity for injection. And so they're scaling up to prove that they could do that. But there are technologies that can do it. That is just one of the up and coming ones that is being scaled up today. Does that make sense?
Mr. Chairman, yes, that does. Thank you, Doctor. But you mentioned this 75%, just created another question. So is that 75% of the stat gas, or is that 75% purity?
Mr. Chair, Representative Bear. So, okay. I think they're designing for, so 100% of the power plant stat gas will go through these membranes. And then it becomes a question of how much of the CO2 do you want to remove from that? So I think they're targeting 70, is it 70, 75, 70? Don't know, 70. 70% of the CO2. But then you have high purity CO2. So if you think about a membrane, you have stat gas on one side and then pure CO2 on the other. And it actually takes more than one pass. So you pull from the stat gas to the high purity CO2. Then you have to go through another membrane to get even higher purity so that you can meet the injection standards that you've referred to. So you can get higher removal rates. It's just all a balance of cost. And I think that's what the pilot demonstration is trying to get the data to refine those numbers to understand at the commercial scale, what are the costs at different capture rates. But I think the technology developer already has estimates for that. This is just going to provide larger scale data.
Thank you, Dr. Krutka. And it sounds like we're moving forward, but we haven't had the final result of that study yet. So
Yes.
that sounds like where we're at. Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, a follow-up question, or a different question actually now. Dr. Krutka, we just passed this bill this last session defining liability, and I know it's probably too early to tell, but I'm curious if you've seen any movement in the private sector based on that bill where we defined how liability will move in this sector.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Representative Bear. Absolutely. I mean, there were already commercial developers looking at projects, but I think this was really necessary for them to move forward. So I think it's part of the overall package, but it was a really important move to to, yeah.
I very much appreciate words, and the words of long-term stewardship were very good on the slide.
Long-term stewardship.
Senator Cooper, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Doctor, a simple logistics question. Are we, when we're injecting the CO2, transporting injection, are we injecting in a liquid phase or in a gas phase?
Mhm. Yes, Mr. Chair, Senator Cooper. So it's actually supercritical fluid, which looks probably more like a liquid, but it's compressible like a gas. The issue is below 3,000 feet below the subsurface, the pressure will change CO2 into what's called a supercritical fluid. And so when we inject it, it has to be under those conditions. And so as you can see, our wells are far below that 3,000 foot limit. So it looks more like a liquid, but it's called a supercritical fluid.
Go ahead.
Doctor, as we convert this CO2 to a supercritical, we have to cool it, or I believe the actual process is heat extraction rather than refrigeration. What are we doing with that heat? Are we reutilizing that in the plant, or where are we going with it?
Representative Greer, Senator Cooper, that is an excellent question. I think it depends on the technology you use. So I actually haven't heard anyone talk about that for a while, but there were some novel compression technologies that were designed specifically so it was easier to extract the heat. I don't know what happened with those, but they were being funded by Department of Energy. So for a technology that uses a temperature swing, and now we're getting pretty technical, but for example, the technology at Petra Nova, the way that works is it has to heat up the liquid to make the CO2 come off in its pure form. So there might be opportunities to reuse that heat. But that is not every technology. So that it would be plant specific what is done with that heat, if anything. But really it's the heat coming off the compressors that potentially could be usable. It's low grade heat though, so.
Okay. Representative Western.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Kritka, so Chairman Greer mentioned just Petra Nova, and I just simply know what it is and that I think it's in mothball status. In your opinion, what are the big lessons that you and your outfit can learn from that situation, kind of from what happened? I'm certainly not saying this is an apples to apples thing, but just given that you're both in the same broader space, when you look at that situation, what are the things you saw or you observed or heard about that you think that we could really learn from and avoid those pitfalls?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Western. So number one that I mentioned was we probably don't want to pick one option for CO2 storage or EOR. You want to be connected to multiple options because what happened was they were connected to one EOR field and it really didn't perform. And they also started that project when oil prices were over $100 per barrel. And by the time it was operational, I think they were below 50, which, anyone who does an enhanced oil recovery project has that built into their calculations, but it was a real problem for the project. That was number one. Number two would be, actually, I would tie back to Texas's energy market. This gets a bit complicated, but Texas has real issues, obviously, with their electricity sector. The Petra Nova project was shut down before that grid went down. So that power in one way or another was needed. So I think there's actually a bigger issue here with not valuing capacity. So valuing reliable energy sources that can be turned on. So the Petra Nova project even was basically told your electricity isn't needed. And then a couple of years later, we saw the ERCOT grid go down. So I think there's actually bigger issues that are big picture, not related to CCS, that should have valued that electricity more than it was. But that's for the project itself. I think the main issue would be making sure you have diversity of things to do with your CO2, whether it's multiple EOR sites, CO2 storage, just have a pipeline network rather than tie to only one project. Does that make sense?
Dr. Kretka,
Okay.
on that, too, my recollection is that single field was over 40 miles away to the edge of it. And the pipeline and the structure associated with that field was a sizable cost of the overall joint venture for
Sure.
that project. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll come back to Cyrus
Yeah.
after that.
Oh, no,
Go
same
ahead.
point, mine's
Do
different.
you have follow-up? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And that was actually kind of your point dovetail on my question. So it sounds like for the viability of this, obviously you want to kind of spread your risk across multiple different fields, but proximity is going to be like kind of one of the defining factors. So wherever you put this type of operation, in theory, it has to be close to these fields that kind of make the whole thing viable. Is that correct?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Representative Western, I think proximity is really important. I mean, we do move a lot of CO2 in this state. It's not a technical issue, it's just a cost issue. So I think, yes, having proximity is good. 40 miles is within the range, but it's probably on the external limits of what you would want to do. So that's what that project was. They were pushing it a little bit, but you can do it. It's just a matter of cost, so.
Dr. Krutka, one more point, and this ties into the carbon safe projects too, is it's not just CO2 for enhanced oil recovery, which gets us excited in Wyoming, but it's also having access to the work that's gone on to the pore space for storage. So you either can use it for enhanced recovery or you have to switch over to storage when the economics are such. Is that?
That's a good.
Yeah, I'm trying to distinguish Wyoming from.
That's a good summary.
Because we have
Yes.
both.
We have both, absolutely. And we've done quite a bit of work on the CO2 storage side. So maybe that's a good segue if.
Thanks,
oh,
Senator
nope.
Rothfuss had a question,
Okay.
and then we'll let you.
Yeah, and it's related to this proximity, and I can't remember how far our CO2 pipeline currently is away from our Y-cusp site. What's the gap remaining there that we would have to build out if we were going to do the hub model?
I will have to find out. I'm not sure.
You got Ms. I'm going to go with the co-chair, and then I'll turn this way for a while.
The Denbury project goes from southeast Wyoming clear to Montana, so they've got more than a 40-mile pipeline
Sure.
that is working on EORI, like you say, in various fields. So their model does work for longer distances. So it just depends on how much volume you have and how big a customers you have.
And Mr. Chair, may I respond to that?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Co-Chair, I think the other thing is economics. So that is a very low cost source of CO2. So you can you can move it, but can we afford to do EOR or CO2 storage? If we move it that far, it depends on the cost of CO2. So from a coal-fired power plant, maybe that might be a little bit far, but for the Chute Creek facility, that's very low cost CO2. So
Senator Cooper?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to speak on that just for a second on the proximity issue. On the enhanced oil recovery on smaller pilot projects, we transport a lot of CO2 by truck, by rail, in the liquid form, especially on smaller projects. On something like the scale of sequestering, obviously you're going to run a pipeline so you can get the volumes there, but there's just a lot of options, especially in the more remote areas to get the CO2 there. It's not hard to transport at all. So.
All right.
okay.
We had lots of questions this morning.
Wonderful. We welcome them. Excited to talk about this work. Okay, so moving to slide 9, talking a little bit about using the work done at the Wyoming Carbon Safe Project as a CO2 storage hub. So this is not enhanced oil recovery, although it is very close to enhanced oil recovery opportunities. The work that's been done today is site characterization. So as I said, we have the 2 completed wells. 3D seismic has been done. Well logs, geologic models have been built. Shallow monitoring networks, so groundwater and soil gas. So we actually have CO2 sensors in the soil that are just collecting baseline CO2 measurements. There is seismic data being monitored in the area. So this is a very noisy area from a seismic location. So it's got multiple coal mines, rail, power plants. And so getting a baseline value of seismic activity is really important for when CO2 is ultimately injected. That will likely be part of a monitoring plan, is to prove that there's no new seismic activity that's impacting anything. And so having those baseline measurements is really important. On the deployment and commercialization side, under this project, we've created model agreements that deal with pore space and offtake. We're completing economic models to understand the economics behind these projects. Worked on permitting. As I said, we will convert our class 1 to class 6, our permits class 1 to class 6, looking at things like NEPA, and we've done quite a bit of work on public outreach that I'll talk about later. So, and on the graph on the right side of the slide, the yellow, I don't know what to call them, they look like little light bulbs, but the yellow dots are the 2 wells. They're only 1,000 feet apart. So you can see them from each other. And then all the green pluses are potential wells that we're, if you were to build out a CO2 storage hub in this area, that's where we would suggest placing the wells. So, and we're in phase 3 of the Carbon Safe project, and we're definitely ready to compete for phase 4, which would, if we move to that phase, would include injection. So exciting.
Yeah, go ahead, Senator.
How many of the projects moved to phase 4?
So I don't think that's been announced.
Okay.
No, not
You don't
announced
know
yet.
yet?
Not
Okay,
announced.
and there's 5 still standing or?
5.
5
Yes.
standing, okay.
Yes. Yeah. Is that 5 now? With Enchant? Okay, still 5, yeah. Okay.
I'd like to see those go about 5 townships to the east.
Okay, so moving on to slide 10, just looking at the CCS timeline for the School of Energy Resources, what we've been doing over the years, or what the team has been doing over the years. I just got here 2 years ago. Was founded in 2006, has been looking around the state. In 2010, the first well was still drilled into Rock Springs Uplift. That allowed the team to collect tremendous amount of information and data, led to one of the first books that was written, so best practices. So the team at School of Energy Resources literally wrote the book on best practices for CO2 storage characterization, has developed models for pressure management. We moved into Carbon Safe, and now we have the 2 wells associated with Carbon Safe. So we've been working the team has been working a long time at a large scale to try to put Wyoming in a good position when this technology was ready for commercialization. And we have knowledge of CO2 storage opportunities around the state, as the co-chairman correctly pointed out. In addition to our existing and operating enhanced oil recovery industry, we have CO2 storage opportunities that we have characterized for years. So moving on to slide 11. As I said, this is the time where we're increasing outreach to, well, we've always tried to work with the private sector, but this is where we're putting a big emphasis on reaching out not only the private sector, but also to the public and explaining what CCUS is. And that's been happening a long time. So on the graph on the right-hand side of the slide, we did a survey under the iWest program, which is a program funded by the Department of Energy, looking at surveying Wyoming energy communities. And one thing that's not on this slide is one of the questions we asked was, how important is it that Wyoming continues to supply energy to the region? And 94% of respondents said it was either extremely or somewhat important for Wyoming to continue to supply energy. So obviously our energy communities believe that this is our past, present, and future to be an energy state. And so that gave us a lot of momentum or a lot of support and to complete our work. And so on the graph on the right, we also asked, how supportive or opposed are you to carbon neutral energy industries? And so the highest level of support is at nearly 74% was CCUS. Other states do not have this level of support for this particular industry. This is because of all the outreach over the years, all the Saturday use, all the webinars, all the outreach that's been done. And this state, I would say generally, at least the energy communities were surveyed in this, they understand that CCUS could be an important part of the energy future, and they do support it. And it was the most supported technology over solar, nuclear, wind, and hydrogen. So in addition, one of the things we've been trying to do, as I said, was remove hurdles, make it easier for commercial developers, try to draw them into Wyoming when they're looking at projects here versus other states. On the left-hand side of the slide is a webinar that was held. So several folks from the School of Energy Resources, as well as the DEQ and Office of State Lands and Investments, all working together to talk about the steps needed to get a Class 6 permit and move forward a commercial CCS project with CO2 storage in Wyoming. So that, and we meet with DEQ and OSLI on a weekly basis to talk about how any issues that folks are seeing and try to iron those out and make it easier and more clear cut. I mean, all we're doing is just trying to get through these first few together to try to get the industry launched. So just trying to understand what issues industry entities are seeing as they move forward.
Well, do you foresee that for enhanced oil recovery, we'll use Class 2 wells, one permit for that, and then have a standby Class 6 permit for sequestration? Or do you think things will all, an entire project will be permitted as Class 6? What are you hearing, and what do you, it's an issue we've kind of bounced around as a committee.
Mr. Chairman, that is a really good question. So I think it's project specific. I think, as we've discussed quite a bit, that it would behoove projects to have more than one opportunity or one option for what to do with their CO2, whether it be EOR or storage.
Think about it. You don't have to answer.
I'm not, yeah, let me think about it. I'll phone a friend afterwards, maybe. Okay. So moving on to slide 12, as I said, I did want to emphasize some of the projects that we're moving forward again, because it is different now. There are commercial projects that have been announced publicly, and some of these projects on slide 12 we're supporting at the School of Energy Resources, and some don't need our support. But I thought it was worth highlighting that the number of projects that have been announced at various phases of development, and I will add that there are commercial developers that we have NDAs with or that aren't publicly announcing anything yet. So this list is actually much longer than what's shown on this slide, but just a few highlights. So there's a Trailblazer project where Tallgrass has made an announcement to convert the Trailblazer pipeline to a CO2 gathering pipeline capable of transporting 10 million tons of CO2 per year. There's the Painter project, which was the first Class 6 application in the state of Wyoming. We thought ours would be, but that has been submitted and under review. They beat us to the punch. That's a depleted oil and gas field that could be converted to store CO2 from a blue ammonia facility, which was discussed a bit yesterday. Really exciting, the prospect of blue ammonia. As you, I'm sure, all know, ExxonMobil has announced expansion of their Chute Creek facility. And then there's the Rocky Mountain Power. So they've committed to RFPs for Jim Bridger 3 and 4 and Dave Johnson Unit 4. So we're just watching that RFP process, but that is out there as well. And as I said, there's many other commercial projects that are underway, but have not made announcements yet. So, and again, I don't think 2 years I couldn't have shown this slide. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, the discussion comes up with the Trailblazer project that we're supporting an out-of-state CO2 disposal. And actually, that enhances our ability to be able to sell coal or natural gas out of Wyoming, because most of those entities that are putting that CO2 in the line are burning our fossil fuels. So it's very important that we support Trailblazer project. Wouldn't you agree?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Co-Chair, I will concur with the esteemed co-chair, also my boss on the Energy Resources Council. But yes, I think we're trying to drive an industry here, and this is one of just many projects. But yeah, it's it would be good if we could take CO2 generated from Wyoming fuels and dispose of it in the state. So we've certainly done a lot of the work for that.
So I think Yeah, there's a couple around Senator Rothfuss and Representative Burkhart. Remember when we funded the research project for the modeling of the Rock Springs uplift? And so that's been in the public domain, and it's that information, that modeling, that's been used by industry to look at these projects. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I think there are several industry entities looking at the Rock Springs uplift.
So that was a good investment for the state?
Yes, sir. It was a good investment for the state, as are all investments in the School of Energy Resources. Okay. Anything else? Okay. So moving to slide 13, I mean, I'm just rounding it up here. I think I've said it more than once, but Wyoming's proactive approach that starts with this committee has put the state in a leading position in CCS or CCUS projects, and there are commercial projects under development today. I think sometimes I get forwards, why are we not moving as fast as some of the ethanol projects? Of course, those are very high purity. It's not even really carbon capture. It's just taking pure CO2 off of something and injecting it. But in general, so those might move quickly, but the projects in Wyoming are large, and they're a little more complex, do require CO2 capture, but I think that the state has set itself up well, and that we do have projects moving forward, in that while some of them are looking at coal-fired power plants, there is a diversity of opportunities out there around CCUS.
Yep, Senator Rothfuss.
Speaking of high purity CO2 streams, flameless oxy-combustion project, where is that right now? How is that going?
Mr. Chair, Senator Rothfuss, the flameless pressurized oxy-combustion project, we've completed our work funded by the Department of Energy. We did not, so we were in the group competing with MTR for the large-scale pilots, and that project was not funded. So right now, we're trying to look at other opportunities to move that technology forward, but we're not making progress on it right now, technically.
And Mr. Chairman, what was the cost of the pilot scale, the next scale that we were looking for the DOE funding for?
Well, Mr. Chair and Senator Rothfuss, the project was quite large. I think it was around 120 million, but we had 12 million committed from the state. Yeah. And so we're looking at, is there a different way to package that maybe now? But it was a pretty large project.
Yeah, it's a great project. Okay, thanks. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you don't pick that scab, Senator Rothfuss.
Okay.
All right, any further questions? I assume you're going to spend the morning with us?
Sure.
For the rest of the presentations?
Yes, sir.
Okay, awesome. So committee, I'm not losing my mind. I still think I have certain prerogatives as a chairman, although I'm not certain. I wanted to have the LSO discussion on the memorandum on 159 after the presentation from SER. So we'll go ahead and hear that, and then we'll get the testimony from the rest of the people that are scheduled to speak. And public comment.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the committee. Luke Plum, LSO. Yes, and I prepared a summary of 2019 Senate File 159. And so in this memo, I just went through just to give an outline through all the provisions within that bill, and I also addressed some of the other changes that were made by subsequent legislation. The primary purpose and kind of general overview of Senate File 159 is, the goal is to limit the recovery of costs for a retiring coal-fired electric generation facility. It provides a process for the sale of a coal-fired electric generation facility that otherwise would be retiring, and it exempts a person who purchases one of these facilities from regulation as a public utility. I did want to note that I did discuss the statutory provisions out of order in 159, just so much so that Wyoming Statute 37.3.117 is the limitation on recovery of capital costs, and when those conditions are met, that's when there's the exemption for the purchase of a coal-fired facility, and so that's why I followed it up with that one. So following in that order. For this statute, unless certain conditions are met, an electric public utility cannot charge rates that would include any recovery of or earnings on the capital costs associated with the construction of a new electric generation facility when they're retiring a coal-fired electric facility. And so the conditions that have to be met is that the utility made a good faith effort to sell the coal-fired facility before retirement, that the utility did not refuse a reasonable offer to sell the facility, and if there was a sale planned, it fell through for some reason beyond their control. The legislature did insert a good faith requirement in 2020 to sell a coal-fired electric generation facility. That was Senate File 21. And when considering whether a good faith effort was made, the commission, the Public Service Commission, can consider, if the utility allowed adequate time for potential buyers of the facility to evaluate and consider, if they want to purchase it. The utility has to make reasonable efforts to notify potential buyers about the opportunity to purchase the facility. Did the utility reasonably evaluate any offers made? And of course, the commission can set any other factors they deem appropriate. So in addition to the good faith effort to sell, the commission also determines whether an offer made was reasonable. They consider, will the offer reduce costs to the utility's customers as opposed to just retiring the coal-fired facility? Would acceptance of the offer reduce risk to the utility's customers, including any diminished environmental remediation risks? And would acceptance of the offer be in the public interest? So the commission can approve procedures for soliciting for and reviewing offers to sell an otherwise retiring coal-fired facility. And if a utility applies to do so before the retirement of the facility, the public utility that does follow those procedures then is not limited to try for when it comes to rate recovery when they build a new replacement facility. And so agreements to sell retiring electric generation facilities are not effective unless they are approved by the commission. And so the commission has several factors to consider during their review, such as, will the buyer be able to have the sufficient financial, technical, and managerial ability to operate the facility? Would they be able to reasonably decommission the facility if it were to be retired? Can the buyer satisfactorily meet the environmental obligations? Can the public utility and the buyer come to an operations agreement if the public utility is only selling part of a facility? And so if they have to work together to run a larger facility, has the buyer agreed to terms and conditions for environmental remediation? And then also the agreement has to include provisions that allows the public utility to revoke the sale, if the buyer can't meet certain conditions, such as, actually being able to run the facility, or if the buyer is unable to secure the necessary operational and labor agreements otherwise. And the agreement has to include a provision that the buyer will still secure commission approval before transferring the facility. And so, I will also note that, in just this past session, House Bill 131, which was effective immediately, exempted utilities from the good faith sale requirements of this section if they are replacing a coal-fired facility with an advanced nuclear reactor. And so, all of that to be said, if you go through the process to sell your retiring coal-fired facility, any person who is then going to operate that coal-fired facility that was purchased under such an agreement, they're exempt from regulation as a public utility under 37.2.133. And so electric public utilities are required to buy electricity that is produced at a coal-fired facility that was sold under this agreement under certain conditions. The buyer of a coal-fired facility has to offer to sell some of their electricity back to the electric public utility. The electricity generated from the coal-fired facility that is sold has to be offered at a price that is not greater than the selling utility's avoided cost. And avoided cost is an important term, that is the incremental cost to an electric utility of electric energy or capacity, or both. But for the purchase from the otherwise retiring coal-fired electric generation facility, the utility would generate itself or incur from in a purchase from another source. And so an additional requirement that a public utility has to purchase from a coal-fired facility that was sold under one of the agreements in the previous section is that the electricity that is sold to the public utility is sold under a power purchase agreement. It has to have specific term length and other conditions approved by the commission. And the commission has to approve 100% cost recovery in the rates of power in that agreement that is 100% allocated to the Wyoming customers of the public utility unless agreed otherwise. And so when the commission does determine an electric utility, public utilities avoided costs, they have additional factors they can consider there as well. The value of the electric energy and the capacity generated by the facility, the value of any reliability benefits that go with operating the facility, and any other factors they determine. And the commission can choose whether or not they want to set the avoided cost price before the purchase of, before, like during the time that a retiring coal-fired facility is going to be up for sale. And this is primarily to inform potential buyers prior to entering into that agreement for the to purchase the retiring facility. And so in the 2020 Senate File 21 that added the provision for the good faith sale, there are some additional requirements that they added onto this section in statute. And it's just to allow a person who purchases a retiring coal-fired facility to sell the electricity back to the public utility in the specific instance to benefit a retail customer. It has to be a retail customer that is already in the pre-existing service territory. They have to have an average demand that exceeds 1 megawatt and that they take service at a primary or at a transmission level. And so if they do this, the coal-fired, the purchaser of the otherwise retiring coal-fired facility can negotiate and agree to a price with that retail customer. And then that electricity that is sold, the public utility just basically has to pass on without increasing the costs, except for specific instances such as the collection of applicable taxes, and to make sure that other Wyoming customers are not negatively impacted. And for a retail customer to receive these benefits, they still must also purchase partial electricity requirements or equivalent service at a rate set by the commission. That is just the overview of Senate File 2019-159. Is there any questions? Yeah, same for those.
Mr. Plum, I appreciate you putting that together, and I think for the committee that'll be back returning, keep this memorandum close because 159 was a strong policy message, and then Senate File 21 that most everybody on this committee worked very hard. Just some modifications, and I think we find we need to be reactive to unintended consequences and open to changes in the business environment. So appreciate the memorandum. Committee, any questions on anything?
Question.
Yeah, so
Mr. Chairman, did you find any, anything that would modify some of this with our repurposing of industrial sites? Did that affect this at all?
Chairman,
go ahead, Mr.
Co-Chairman. I did not look into that specific issue. I primarily looked at the impacts of 159 and the subsequent legislation. But if the committee desires, I can look into that further.
okay, well, we'll keep moving on, I think. So whichever order we want to do this with Rocky Mountain Power and Glenrock Energy, do you want to present together or separately? How are we all feeling this morning? So Rocky Mountain Power is listed first. I see Glenrock folks stepped outside, so we'll go with Rocky Mountain Power.
Well, good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Rick Kaysen with Rocky Mountain Power, and you may remember the gentleman to my right, Tom Carter, who is also part of the Rocky Mountain Power team as well. So with respect to coming up together or separately, we're just going to follow the agenda, if I may, Mr. Chairman. And what we would like to do this morning is to provide the committee a status or an update with regards to what Rocky Mountain Power has been working on with regards to the CCUS discussion. And the good Dr. Krukla has given us a little mini introduction as far as, again, as she identified what the company has committed to. And so with that, I will provide some details. And as we move forward here in the balance of 2022 as well. So we will issue 2 parallel carbon capture requests for proposals. So 2 different RFPs. They will be issued no later than December 31st of this year. We are targeting the fall of 2022. But again, that is our target to fall. The bidders on the RFPs will have approximately 3 months to prepare their bids, and then the company will anticipate, about a 3-month period of time to be able to review and evaluate the bids. But this does not include any type of time frame for contract negotiations. So this is going to be quite a bit of due diligence and a lot of review, because we're hoping for and anticipating a good response to these 2 separate requests for proposals. The RFPs will seek bids to build and construct full-scale amine-based carbon capture systems on the Dave Johnston Unit 4, outside of Glenrock, and then also for the Jim Bridger Units 3 and 4 in the Rock Springs vicinity. And there you have, again, the 2 separate RFPs. The objective of the carbon capture request for proposals process is to comply with Wyoming's House Bill 200 and also the associated regulations that followed that particular statute, as well as, and this is very important, this is a key part, and we all lived through this earlier this year, is the requirements under the Regional Haze Consent Decree with Wyoming for specifically Jim Bridger's Units 3 and 4. The procurement process will demonstrate that the installation of the carbon capture, utilization and storage, or CCUS, for Dave Johnston 4 and Jim Bridger's 3 and 4 at full scale will either technically or perhaps not technically be achievable from an economic feasibility standpoint. So again, that's just a part of the process and the review to make sure that the technology is going to work and it's going to be economically viable to do so. The RFPs may result.
Mr. Case, sorry, and
No, yes, sir.
I just have to smile because how do you measure the economic feasibility of not being able to supply people with electricity? So I say that if we're not able to support the energy needs of our country with coal, how do you factor that in that economic study? I mean, is it really just, does it mean that we have to hold baseline electrical rates exactly the same, or does it mean we look to the future and the overall energy needs and reliability? Yeah. And you may not know the answer to that, but that is the question for all of us.
Mr. Chairman, I think it is, it's the latter. We have to look to the future.
Okay.
We have to look to the future. Okay. Installing if I may continue then, sir.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, then installing the CCUS technology at the full scale for the identified power plants, it's going to be a challenging process. And I think we, again, with the SCR presentation, which I think was really, really good and kind of exciting, again, this is going to be a challenge. But we're taking that on very seriously, and we would like to see this work. As we heard earlier, there were the Petra Nova project in Texas, and so we don't need to go in depth on that, but there's also a commercial operation up in Canada that is still functioning as well. So again, there's a little bit of history right there. Both of these plants, and this is not and I share this because this is not an inexpensive activity. Both of those plants were about $1 billion each. Okay, so that when we talk about the economics, we talk about the review. These are serious dollars, and I think it's serious for any commercial operation. I think it's very serious for the state of Wyoming as a whole. So again, we're taking this very seriously. As I mentioned, both projects will be retrofitted with the amine-based carbon capture systems, and this is again part of that project. We learned from these other projects how we can move forward with this as well. I think it's important to make sure that we have the right technology. We want to do this right. We want to make sure we have good partners in this as well. And, I've mentioned the economic viability. And we also want to consider in this process, when we are adding equipment to 50-year-old generating units. So there's a challenge right there. So again, we want to, part of this is to focusing on what we truly believe in, is that's the all-above energy strategy. And this, I think, can be a key piece of it for Rocky Mountain Power as well as the state of Wyoming. So, sir, that is a quick update with regards to where we're headed with this. We are excited about this. We're taking this very seriously. And when we're talking about $1 billion projects, it has to be taken seriously. So with that, sir, I'll try to answer questions that you may have.
Yep. Appreciate the update. Yeah, Mr. Co-Chair.
Mr. Chairman, I'm assuming that there might be some federal funds available, DOE or otherwise, for this kind of a project. Would that be Rocky Mountain's place to get that, or are you expecting the contractor to apply for and get that money?
Okay. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, I think that is part of the discussions that would go on with any type of a partners. And we would certainly like to take advantage of those dollars. For the Petra Nova project, there was $200 million in federal funding that did support that project. So where we can take advantage of, tax dollars that left Wyoming to come back to Wyoming, why not?
Yep, Representative Hunter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kaysen, thank you for being here today for your testimony. We heard yesterday that Japan has decided to convert their coal-fired generation to ammonia-based. And we also heard that ammonia is possible to be utilize the coal that we have in the state and create ammonia. So my question, Mr. Kaysen, has Rocky Mountain Power looked at feasibility of converting these power plants to ammonia? As you mentioned, all of the above possibilities, but is ammonia one thing that you have looked at for conversion?
Okay. Mr. Chairman, Representative Heiner, I do not have the answer to that.
I don't have, Mr. Chairman, Representative Heiner, I do not have the answer to that either, but I'm happy to go back and ask those questions.
We'll get an answer.
Follow up?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for that, because if the sheer volume that they're converting in Japan, that's a large endeavor, and it must be viable if they're making that determination and make it public. But the other question I have is, we know that Naughton is slated to be retired here in the near future, next couple of years. Has Rocky Mountain Power received any communication from any entity expressing interest in purchasing that plant?
Okay. Mr. Chairman, Representative Heiner, again, Naughton again was converted to natural gas, as we know, so it's still operating. But to the best of my knowledge, I am not aware of any requests considering selling that particular power plant.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We know one of the units at Naughton has been converted to natural gas, but there are 2 units that are still coal-fired. So you know of no communication from any entity at this point to express interest in purchasing the coal-fired power plant?
Chairman, again, Representative Heiner, I do not have knowledge of that, but that would be a follow-up question. And
Happy,
Tom?
Mr. Chair, Representative Heiner, happy to ask those questions.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, I read in the news this morning that the country of Austria is revving up their old coal-fired power plant and Germany's looking to do the same thing. Luckily, they didn't tear them to the ground, and they're there, and it'll take them 4 months, just in time for winter, actually, so Austrians and Germans can heat homes this winter. My question is, what are we doing with our coal-fired power plants that you plan on retiring? Are you planning on just raising them to the ground and reclaiming the land? Are we going to keep them mothballed in case we have a crisis like we're seeing in Germany and Austria, where we need to get them back online in case we have an energy crisis here at home?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Beitman, great question, because when we think about, again, reliability of power and that type of thing, I think that's associated with what the company does on an ongoing basis. And I mentioned this yesterday with the integrated resource planning, looking out to the future as well, and trying to ask those what-if questions. I think that is, again, to give you a definitive answer, mothball, wait for 5 years. I do not have that, sir. But I do know that it would be part of that resource planning and looking to the future and what do we do with X if. And again, looking at the economics of it too has to be a probability.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah,
Mr.
yeah,
Chair,
go
would you
ahead,
mind if
Mr.
I,
Carter. Yeah.
thanks, Mr. Chair, Senator Beitman. You know, one of the things that we're running into additionally is not just what we're looking at through our integrated resource plan, but also pressures from the federal government, what federal energy policy pressures that are being put on, not just us as a company, but Wyoming as a state. And Rick mentioned the regional haze consent decree that we're trying to comply with here in Wyoming, but just last week, the state of Wyoming, their DEQ, responded to the ozone transport rule. Provided comments to the ozone transport rule. As a company, we also provided comments to the ozone transport rule. It's a 800-page rule that, if implemented as currently written, would has some dire, we believe, some dire responses or dire constraints upon all power generation through our service area, especially Wyoming and Utah. And so while we're trying to have a long-term plan to ensure baseload power throughout the Intermountain West, we're fighting a hostile federal government that just says we're interested in moving forward and we don't care how you keep the lights on. And so we're trying to work with the state of Wyoming and to say to the EPA, you know, you need to have a better understanding of what happens in the West so that we can have a plan to ensure that we keep our lights on, that we have viable economic opportunities in these regions. And so while we're trying to do this in the best economic and energy way possible, what you saw in Germany is that, yes, they were able to shift in a productive, constructive way because they didn't react in a political manner. What we're hopeful is that we don't put ourselves in a position from a federal government perspective that we are forced to do something that puts us all behind the 8 ball and leaves Wyoming in a position to not be viable in the short and long term.
Yep. Senator Beitman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. And hopefully, I hate to do what if
Senator Beitman,
scenarios.
could you, I'm
Sorry.
having a hard time hearing you.
So
Sorry. Thank
I
you.
hate to do what if scenarios, but it's highly likely that the Supreme Court will rule in our favor in the West Virginia versus EPA case. They've been on a roll lately. I hope, hopefully they'll come through one last time for us. And if that is the case, and the EPA is kind of smacked back down and the feds are smacked down and put back in their box, does that allow you to be able to mothball these coal plants if you do still to continue to plan to retire these, to keep them there just in case, like we just saw with Austria and Germany, to have those available for emergency purposes?
Mr. Chair, Senator Beitman, I think, and again, I'm still very new on this job, and I've been instructed not to guess or to lie. And so I don't want to guess, and I definitely don't want to lie to you. So I'd love the opportunity to dig in deeper to where our current plan is, what I know where our 2021 plan is, but we're in the process of writing our 2023 plan. And, you know, our goal is to ensure that the state of Wyoming has baseload power. And while we know what baseload power looks like today, as we look to the future, the 5, 10, 15-year period, and we don't want to put ourselves in a position to fail, and I don't mean us, Rocky Mountain Power, I mean us, the people of Wyoming, that I want to be able to have a better answer to this question for you. And so if you give us some time, we'll make sure we have a good answer to that question.
Yep. You got one more, Senator Beitman? Okay.
Then I think
You're just keeping your co-chair from answering his question.
I'm just, from a policy, from being on this side of the
Yeah.
table and as a policymaker, it's important that we look after the best interests of our citizens. And I can't imagine having 10 years from now, constituents come to us saying, why in the world did you let, say, Rocky Mountain Power tear down perfectly good coal-fired power plants when we're obviously in a world of hurt right now? So look at it through our lens too, and how we're trying to protect Wyoming as a whole and our constituents. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may add to that, and Senator Biden, again, remember that the Public Service Commission also has a say into this when we get, if we get to that point in time where the decommissioning of a power plant is a possibility. So there will be a lot more discussion on that as we possibly move forward. Okay.
Mr. Co-Chair, you had a question?
It isn't a question, it's just somebody asked earlier if we'd looked into converting our coal plants to ammonia. One of the members of the ERC sends out a lot of information, and one of the things he sent some time ago, and I don't remember what it was about Japan changing over to some other form of power because of the price of coal that they're getting from Australia. And I think the price was way above $100 a ton that they were paying Australia for their coal. So they were looking for an alternative, and it must be that ammonia was a good alternative for that. I would suggest that that's not a good alternative for Wyoming because our coal is less than $20 a ton. And so we still can fire with that. And that's why we're so interested in CCUS to clean up our stacks so we can continue to burn our coal. So I don't think ammonia or any other, you guys might study it or probably already have. And I don't think we'll find that that's a good alternative for US. Anyway, that was what happened with Japan.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Co-Chair, look, as it's been stated before throughout this meeting this morning, Wyoming is set up very well for CCUS, and it's exciting for us. We are excited about this RFP process. We will seek mature and will capitalize technology to ensure that as we go through this process, and while some may call this bureaucracy, we're just calling it due diligence. We want to make sure that if and when we enter into a process, a CCUS process, that it puts this state in the best position to succeed short-term and long-term. And so Wyoming is the best place to do this. We're excited about the regulatory structure that this legislature has put in place to be able to execute against the CCUS plan. And so, we're doing our due diligence to make sure that we can be successful.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. One, I appreciate coming in, having a discussion with us. I very much appreciate what I'm going to call a changed attitude from 2 years ago. Very much so. Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, with your permission, if we could provide an update on the status of the RFPs at your end of October meeting, because we're in the fall timeframe there, if that would be permissible and acceptable.
Yeah, I think so. I think this is completely inappropriate, but only if you bring donuts.
We'll get back with you on that, sir.
I think I've gotten in trouble for that before, but. Yeah, all right. Wally or Glenrock Energy, you guys are up next.
Jeez, he's really gonna lay it on us.
See, he's got his Goshen County dress on. Please introduce yourself and.
Push harder.
There you go.
Well, thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman Anderson and Co-Chair Greer, and greetings, member of the Joint Minerals Committee. I'm Wally Walski, formerly a Goshen County Commissioner and currently serve as Glenrock Energy Senior Policy Advisor. It is a pleasure to be here with you today. Thank you for this opportunity to address your committee regarding Senate File 159 in conjunction with the Dave Johnston Generating Station and adjacent muddy Glenrock oil fields. I would like to introduce the two gentlemen who will present with me today. Mr. Matthew Cooney from New York City is our company's financial manager, and Mr. Dale Cottom is the company's Wyoming regulatory attorney from Afton. I would also like to acknowledge other members of the Glenrock team in attendance. Mr. Terrence Manning is Glenrock's Chief Executive Officer, and also Ms. Kristen Lee is Glenrock's political lobbyist from Cheyenne. Just a few minutes ago, Mr. Ari Bernstein, our majority owner from New York City as well, was here, but he had another meeting that he had to go and attend. So let me begin by saying Glenrock Energy is a privately owned Wyoming energy and carbon management company and a 4-year advocate of carbon capture at the Dave Johnston Power Plant. Under a private industry proposal for carbon capture at Dave Johnston's Power, the financing projections assume private capital and does not include any state financial assistance. The private industry proposal does not seek to burden ratepayers with surcharges to pay the cost of installing or operating carbon capture equipment at the Dave Johnston Power Plant. In addition, the current development proposals assume private industry to invest approximately $500 million for carbon capture at the Dave Johnston Unit Number 4. The proposal, which has been transmitted in prior iterations of requests for expressions of interest from the plant owner, intends to inject captured CO2 from a carbon captured retrofitted David Johnston Unit Number 4 for low carbon oil production into suitable subsurface reservoirs in the muddy Glenrock oil fields and create an economic financial impact for additional royalties, severance taxes, and production tax revenue with the potential of generating over $1 billion for the state of Wyoming and Converse County over a period of several years. I cannot emphasize enough that the private industry business model is different from a public utility. On May 25th, the owner of the Dave Johnston Generating Station asked parties to confirm their interest in participating in a future RFP process related to carbon capture, utilization, and storage on Dave Johnston Unit Number 4. Glenrock Energy confirms its interest and its expectant to consider the much anticipated request for proposals to be issued later in the year. With some regret, Glenrock Energy acknowledges that the RFP is presently organized for an EPC structured contract, which stands for engineer, procure, and construct. In other words, the incumbent utility would develop, own, and operate the carbon capture facility. This RFP does not allow an alternative scenario for any independent third party from private industry. I believe an alternative solution which allows a private industry solution can provide the greatest benefit for all stakeholders. The Glenrock team believes a transparent evaluation involving all participants in Wyoming's energy future is desirable, and this includes allowing private industry solutions for carbon capture projects submitted for Dave Johnston Unit Number 4. Mr. Cooney will further address this issue during his presentation. At this time, I'm turning it over to Mr. Cottom for a brief overview of the regulatory landscape following Senate File 159. Next, Mr. Cooney will offer an overview of Glenrock Energy's carbon capture plans for Dave Johnston Unit Number 4, low carbon oil recovery at the muddy Glenrock oil field, and then back to me for concluding remarks. Mr. Cottam, the floor is all yours, sir.
Yes, good morning, Chairman Anderson, Chairman Greer, members of the committee. Can you hear me now?
Yes, you're coming in fine. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. As I said, good morning. My name is Dale Cottam. I'm a regulatory attorney with the Wyoming firm of Bailey, Stock, Harmon, Cottam, and Lopez. And we have been advising Glenrock on legislative and utility regulatory matters for a number of years now. I'd like to briefly describe the state of the regulatory landscape with respect to CCUS in Wyoming. And let me start by saying Mr. Plum from the LSO did an excellent job of summarizing SF 159 in his comments and his memo. As he mentioned, SF 159 became effective on July 1st of 2019. And it requires a utility to first offer a coal-fired electric plant for sale before it's eligible to be retired. Through the process, the utility must act in good faith. It must be an open, transparent process that's monitored by the Public Service Commission. And after a plant is sold, SF 159 requires the selling utility to purchase electricity from the new owner at rates determined by the commission. If a utility doesn't follow the prescribed process, then they cannot obtain full rate recovery for alternative generating resources that they purchased to replace the coal-fired plant. And I just want to thank Chairman Greer for what he said about SF 159 sending a strong policy message to the industry and to utilities. I couldn't agree more. It's an excellent piece of legislation, in my opinion. It's going to be very effective at protecting Wyoming in the various ways that it does. And I also agree that everyone in this discussion needs to be reactive as we go forward, and this whole landscape continues to develop. And I would just add, Chairman Greer, if I could, that I would ask, and Glenrock asks, that we not just be reactive, but we be proactive as well. And in particular, on the economic viability discussion and examination. I think that's where a lot of this discussion is going to become very detailed and very extensive. In terms of SF 159 rulemaking, almost immediately after it was passed, the Public Service Commission embarked on a thorough, detailed, and exhaustive rulemaking exercise. The commission ensured that it was very inclusive and collaborative, and it resulted in an excellent roadmap, if you will, to guide utilities and other stakeholders through the process of offering a coal-fired plant for sale and facilitating electricity, the sale of electricity back to the utility. The roadmap, if you will, requires a utility to file a formal application with a commission prior to retiring a coal plant, and the commission approval must be granted before a utility can retire a plant. Most importantly, the utility must act in good faith. They must follow the solicitation process according to those commission rules. And as Mr. Plum stated, that if a sale doesn't occur, it has to be beyond the reasonable control of the utility. I want to briefly touch upon other legislation and regulations that have come about since SF 159, as it leads into some of the other comments and concerns that Glenrock would like to share today. As you know, SF 159 was followed by this other important legislation that encourages CCUS, including HB 200. HB 200 requires utilities and stakeholders to collaborate with the commission to establish low carbon standards. And in March, the two major electric utilities in the state filed applications to establish intermediate low carbon standards. They filed those applications with the commission. And in both filings, each utility provided technical studies that describe what would be required to install CCUS on some of their facilities. And they also provided estimates of costs. One utility focused on converting coal generation to gas generation, in my view, the way I read it. The other utility suggested that the forthcoming RFP process will help better inform what's possible in terms of CCUS. And you heard a little bit about that this morning from Mr. Rick Kaysen. Those two dockets are open and active at the Public Service Commission. They're proceeding fairly quickly, and I would expect that the hearings will take place before the end of the year, which is about the time we expect one or more RFPs to be issued by one of those utilities, as you heard earlier this morning. And then I would like to conclude my summary by agreeing with Chairman Greer that it does appear that attitudes are changing, and in Glenrock's view, that certainly can be refreshing, that attitudes are changing. But Glenrock would ask that we change the entire perspective and look at ways that CCUS can be economically viable. It can help serve the electric load and meet the reliability standards that the state needs and that our customers expect, and that we collectively reach the finish line and a success with CCUS. And Mr. Chairman, that concludes my comments. I'll be happy to stand for questions or proceed to the next presenter for Glenrock.
Committee, any questions, Mr. Cotton? I have more of an observation, I guess. Yeah, I was in a couple of very heated closed room meetings with Rocky Mountain Power 2 years ago. I can assure you we're looking in the right direction, and appreciate that. I also know that when I looked at the Petra Nova facility, and we've discussed that a few times here, but it was a multi-layered joint venture that came together with different parties. And a component of that, of offsetting costs or supplementing the costs of construction of these billion-dollar capture projects, was the leg of going to enhanced oil recovery to oil fields and assets that are held. And, I realize this is a legislative meeting and we're always reactive and behind, and it's awkward, and I'm more used to a business setting. But why in the hell can't we work together and get a joint venture and put something to where the utility owns the capture and sells the CO2? So just an observation. I won't be around much longer, so you don't have to listen to my observations in the future.
I'll say thank you for that.
Anyhow, Mr. Cooney, you're up, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Wolski, Mr. Cottom, Mr. Co-chairs, members of the committee. I have some slides. I think Dale is going to share his screen.
Okay.
So bear with us for a moment. You could skip ahead a couple, 3 slides to the one with the pictures of a power plant. Perfect, thank you. So thanks again. Just very simply, starting out, Glenrock's proposal is the installation and operation of post-combustion carbon capture at Unit 4 of the Dave Johnson Power Plant. Next slide, please. This is a schematic of the project, a description. It's actually pretty simple. A third-party developer, Glenrock Energy, or a company like ours, installs carbon capture equipment at Unit 4 of Dave Johnston. A commercially proven process removes over 95% of the carbon dioxide from the exhaust stream of that unit. For instance, the Mitsubishi Heavy Industries process has been deployed at 14 sites to date. They provide performance guarantees to the developer and operator. Moving along, multiple alternatives exist for storage and sequestration of the captured carbon dioxide. Most importantly, we would build a 6-mile pipeline to the Muddy Glenrock oil fields, which are owned and operated by Glenrock Energy and are located, again, less than 6 feet away. We inject that carbon dioxide into the reservoirs to produce low carbon oil. I'll speak more about that in a moment. The fields also have reservoirs which are suitable for Class 6 wells for deep saline sequestration, so we don't need to produce oil. And we do agree that having both alternatives is important. As a further alternative, we can build a 24-mile pipeline spur to connect to existing carbon dioxide pipelines. We can sell excess carbon dioxide to other oil companies. Wyoming oil fields contain over 1.6 billion barrels of currently stranded low-carbon oil reserves. More on the Muddy Glenrock fields. It's over 33,000 acres. It's the largest single block of contiguous state acreage in Wyoming. These are mature oil fields with over 90 million barrels of oil that's producible through CO2 injection. Development of those barrels of oil will result in $1.2 billion of royalty and production tax revenues to the state of Wyoming and Converse County. Next slide, please. Mr. Wolski mentioned before that an independent entrepreneurial company, Glenrock Energy or a company, another third-party developer, would bring a better approach to carbon capture. I will now explain how this approach will provide additional benefits to stakeholders. First, a comment on SF Senate File 159. Glenrock Energy supports the intent of SF 159, which was to unlock the value in situations where the current owner of a coal-fueled power plant is unwilling or unable to facilitate carbon capture. That said, the carbon capture developer doesn't need to own the plant. We're happy to form a joint venture and to work with the utility or some other ultimate owner, whoever that may be. Moving on, we acknowledge that carbon capture is expensive. It costs over $500 million just to retrofit one unit at Dave Johnston. We get that. I'm an accountant. I spend lots of time thinking about this stuff. Under Glenrock's proposal, the third-party developer, not the utility customers, will be responsible for those costs of installing carbon capture. The developer will fund those expenditures mostly through 45Q tax credits and also from the cash flow from the sales of carbon dioxide for low carbon oil production. In addition, the third-party developer, not the utility customers, will be responsible for the costs of operating the carbon capture equipment. Furthermore, the carbon capture facility, along with oil field operators, will purchase substantial amounts of energy from the generation station. What does that mean? This will increase the station's capacity utilization and efficiency and actually lower the cost to be borne by the utilities customers. And it will eliminate the greenhouse gas emissions and keep this low-cost, reliable, dispatchable resource in operation well beyond its current scheduled retirement date. This is Glenrock's proposal. We're prepared to, actually are assembling a team of world-class technical and financial partners to realize it. We've been working, for instance, we've been working with Mitsubishi since 2018. We've completed considerable work that supports the benefits to this approach, which I've just described. We certainly believe in transparency. We're prepared to share that economic analysis with the committee and all other shareholders at any time. I'll conclude by saying our only ask is for an objective, transparent evaluation of this proposal involving all the stakeholders in Wyoming's energy future. In other words, let the proposed project speak for itself. That concludes my remarks. Thanks again to the co-chairs and committee. I'll take any questions. Looks like we may have one.
Chairman Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, I didn't get what EPG stands for.
EPC.
EPC is
PC?
Engineering, Procurement, and Construction. That's the contract that the developer of a facility enters into.
Yeah, right. I know. I got that part, but I didn't get what the.
Mr. Chairman.
Anyway, you will not make a proposal, EPC proposal. You'll make a third-party developer proposal?
Yeah, we're not an EPC company, so we can't make an EPC proposal. We're happy to align ourselves with one and store the CO2 that they might be capturing. That's one approach. Another approach is the proposal that we're prepared to make as or a company like us could make as a third-party private industry developer of a carbon capture facility. That's, Mr. Chairman, I think that fits with the joint venture approach that you described at the beginning of our presentation.
Thank you.
All right. You gonna bring us home?
I want to bring you home.
All right.
Once again, Mr. Co-Chairman, thank you very much for placing this on your busy agenda today. We sincerely appreciate having this opportunity to share our opinion as the committee deliberates on carbon capture initiatives during Wyoming's energy transition. Let me close by comparing similarities between a private industry developer and former University of Wyoming quarterback Josh Allen, as each face obstacles as underdogs along the way to becoming overachievers. Josh was just a farm kid with a passion to play football, yet not one major college thought he was good enough to play collegiate ball except the University of Wyoming. While Josh was a high draft choice to play in the National Football League, many skeptics still believed he was just another overrated player from a small-time school. Nevertheless, all Josh Allen ever wanted was to have a fair chance to showcase his talents and prove himself on the field. On the other hand, the private industry developers interested in retrofitting CCUS to Dave Johnston's unit number 1 are independent, entrepreneurial, next-generation environmental stewardship companies, bullish about extending fossil fuel baseload generation by capturing a byproduct of reliable energy generation and converting it into a value-added commodity for expanding oil production. And nevertheless, it seems only fair to provide an opportunity to showcase its management project on a level playing field. Over more than 4 years, Glenrock Energy has not been afforded a playing field opportunity, and in fact has been branded as not having adequate financial resources or without a technology partner or lack of operational expertise. Yet Glenrock Energy continues to assemble a world-class team of financial, technical, and managerial partners for making carbon capture and enhanced oil recovery a viable reality. Josh Allen remains a talented player, but a different type of athlete that recently signed a huge contract, is now a household name around the country, and becoming a superstar on his way to a Hall of Fame career. A private industry developer has to be rock-solid, strategically positioned, independent energy company that is fully capable of delivering upon a commitment of successfully implementing a dual-purpose demonstration project in Wyoming. This state has become a national poster child for commercial carbon management operations at the best geological location in the nation, the Converse County project involving the Dave Johnston plant. Josh Allen was great for Wyoming football fans, and I firmly believe Glenrock Energy will be equally as great for unprecedented financial economic impact for the state of Wyoming and benefits to all its stakeholders. This concludes our presentation, committee members. Thank you again, Co-Chairman Anderson and Co-Chairman Greer. Team Glenrock now stands for any additional questions.
Committee, any questions? Okay. We appreciate the, oh, you have a question?
Oh, no.
Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, I appreciate your efforts and presentation here, and I hope that the RFP that comes out from Rocky Mountain Power later this year includes the option for a third party. They in testimony to this morning, we heard that they like to look at all of the above. So that's a good indication that they will take a look at that as a viable option rather than, limiting the scope of that RFP. We heard yesterday from Mr. Cooney that you're also working on a project over in the southwest Wyoming, the ammonia syngas project, and that, you would create ammonia, which would be a viable option to retrofit some of these coal-fired power plants. Have you expressed any interest to Rocky Mountain Power about purchasing or working with them for the Naughton units that are existing right now, coal-fired power plant?
Mr. Co-Chairs, Representative, thanks for that question. As it relates to New Naughton, which Glenrock is also co-developing, the utility conducted a request for expressions of interest process last year, which is the precursor to the RFP. And yes, we did present the New Naughton project to the utility as part of that process.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Have you received any response from the utility company under that expression of interest for that?
We presented the project. We had a meeting with the utility. We further discussed it as part of that of that process. We've not had an active dialogue since then, but we do acknowledge that the Naughton facility is not a subject. The Naughton facility and the technology, the process we're proposing to deploy at New Naughton, which is in Kemmerer, are different from the amine solvent carbon capture technology prescribed by or anticipated to be prescribed by the RFP process.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm concerned with the Senate File 159. We have legislation in place to further that dialogue when a third party is interested in purchasing a plant that is scheduled for retirement. But I'm worried that that dialogue is not happening and that is not progressing the way it should. And so, Mr. Chairman, maybe we could have a report later on, or a letter from Rocky Mountain Power of how that dialogue is progressing and whether it is progressing as we envisioned it when we wrote this legislation.
Yeah, I think we have quite a few follow-ups from Rocky Mountain Power, and Chairman Anderson and I can maybe put a more formal request together, which will help out the presenters that were here today in coming forward with that. So we can do that. I think, Brian, you can help us out later. Okay. Any further questions? Well, gentlemen, we appreciate the presentation. Keep working forward. Progress is being made. Just going to say, Wally, you're talking about carbon capture, and Josh Allen, if you could have worked in sugar and Black Angus cattle, I would have been real excited. So, all right, thank you. So we'll move on to public comment. Who in the audience wishes a comment? If I can get a raise of hands, do we have anybody that has any public comment on this topic?
Don't rush the mic.
Okay, then do we have, we've got Powder River Basin Resource Council registered. Do they have anyone on there?
Chairman, could we take a break before?
Well, I'm just about ready to finish up.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
We have Michelle Irwin. I'm not sure if she wants to speak on this.
Okay, well, if she does, just find out very quickly. Because my co-chair is itching for a break, and
The 10 o'clock break we're just about to do. Yeah.
okay, all right, well, we will, let's see. It is 10:30. Our next time is scheduled for 11. So this, let's try to get in somewhere about 10 minutes, 10:50, something like that. Then we'll get our presentation on rare earth minerals, which we appreciate. So, okay, we'll stand
I brought
recess.
donuts in the back for everybody, and nobody can leave till
Okay, we'll call the meeting back to order. So committee members, I want to thank Co-Chairman Anderson for making these arrangements, and then Randy Scott for coming to give us an update on rare earth minerals in Wyoming. It's been a while, actually, since we've had a report here. And we will be looking at, and it'll, unfortunately, the way the summer went, but in October, we'll be spending some time on agreement state status with the Department of Environmental Quality regarding, and what I guess would be is the expansion of thorium, which is then considered a waste or a byproduct. I guess you can update us on that as we go with respect to the upgrading the ore. And anyway, I think we're looking at DEQ somewhere. We'll have their scoping done end of July, 1st of August. Okay, all right. Anyway, that's what I think. So we'll probably, we may even have to do maybe a quick update, informal update with DEQ when that report comes in to get some direction, just sort of on the fly in maybe early September or something. But we'll see how that goes. So anyway, with that, Mr. Scott, if you would please, and do we have slides for up there, or everybody's got a handout? Okay. Friends, give me the thumbs up and the nod and all the good stuff. All right. Please introduce yourself and welcome.
Good morning, Chairman Graham. Good morning, Chairman Greer.
So I've been called.
Good morning.
I've been called a lot worse.
Anderson and members of the committee. My name is Randy Scott, and I'm the president and CEO of Rare Element Resources. It's quite an honor to be with you today, and we very much appreciated the invitation that we received. And as was mentioned, it's been some time since we've updated folks about the status of our project and our company, and particularly the recent successes that we've been having with regards to what we call a demonstration plant. So it's appropriate that I be here today and to update you with regards to that. And hopefully you'll be as excited as we are about the opportunities that this is bringing to the town of Upton and to the state of Wyoming. Next slide, please. You're all going to read this, right? Yeah, we got it. We're going to skip over this as quickly as we can. This is our forward-looking statement. It's obligatory, so there you go. You got it. Okay, let's move on to the next slide then. You may or may not know that Rare Element Resources has been working in the state of Wyoming now for about 18 years. And all of that time has been devoted to one particular project up near Sundance we call the Bear Lodge Project. That Bear Lodge project started as a dream by one of our directors early on, who then began to explore the deposit in inexpensive manner. And then eventually, over a period of several years now, that resource has become what we believe is one of the most important rare earth resources in the world. We've explored it, we've delineated it, we know what's there, we've drilled the heck out of it, so we're in good shape as far as the resource goes. Any good resource company who wants to be successful in the world also knows that you can't just determine a resource, but you have to be able to develop technology, process technology to recover the rare earth elements from the rock itself. And that is always a very unique situation for every rare earth deposit in the world. And you have to spend a lot of money, do a lot of test work, do a lot of pilot plant testing. And hopefully, if you're successful in all of those, you arrive where we are now, which is to move forward into a demonstration scale project of our technology. So that is our number one priority right now, is to engage in that project over the next 2.5 years from today or thereabouts, to develop, to engineer, build, construct, and operate a rare earth processing and separation plant at Upton. Next slide, please. Let me first draw a quick distinction, because there's been some confusion about what we're talking about sometimes with regards to whether this is the commercial plant that we've talked about in the past as an extension of the resource itself. And what we are working on right now is the demonstration plant. So I'll give you a little bit of information to update you on the resource and the commercial plant, but I'll spend quite a bit of time talking about the demonstration plant itself, its timeline, its costs, how we got to where we are, and where we hope to be in a period of 3 years, 2.5 to 3 years. First of all, as I said, the Bear Lodge resource is, we believe, it's world-class. As I also said, we know that because we have extensively drilled it. We have hundreds of thousands of feet of drill core that has been analyzed and built into geological models of the resource itself. The resource is also has a major competitive advantage in that it is rich in the rare earth elements that are important to the manufacture of high-strength permanent magnets. And that's not always the case with rare earth deposits around the world, but we're fortunate here in the United States and in Wyoming and at Bear Lodge to have that kind of distribution of the elements themselves. As some of you may know, we have been, I mentioned, we've been here a very long time as a small exploration development company in the natural resource field, and in particular with regards to rare earth elements. We have suffered our ups and downs, just like everybody else has in this industry, where you depend on stockholders' interest in financing your company because you don't have anything to sell yet. So you're spending money, a lot of money, and you have to be able to convince shareholders to be able to pony up the next time around and keep making progress. As you all probably know, 2015, 2016, and part of 2017 were very unfriendly times in the industry, and it was very difficult for us to raise additional funds. We decided at that point that what we wanted to do was go out and seek a strategic partner, a significant strategic partner, one who had downstream aspirations with regards to the rare earth elements, magnets, and particularly concern about China's participation and current dominance of the rare earth industry. So in 2017, we were very fortunate to have identified and became knowledgeable with a company called General Atomics. General Atomics ended up acquiring 38% interest in the company at that time, an option to acquire up to 49% over 5 years. They optioned it in 2 years. And then finally, just in December of this year, General Atomics became the majority shareholder of Rare Element Resources with about 54% ownership. If you don't know who General Atomics is, they are one of the largest defense contractors in the United States. They are privately held, and they do such things as build Predator drones, and they have an extensive cadre of high technology senior PhDs working for them in all energy, natural resource fields, and in manufacturing as well. So General Atomics has been a wonderful partner for Rare Element Resources. We were very fortunate to have found them. They have a subsidiary company, affiliated company in Germany, who we call UIT because we can't pronounce the long German name. But UIT has extensive experience in natural resource and process development. So for the last 2 or 3 years now, UIT has been working with us, with Rare Element Resources, extending the proprietary technology for processing and separation that we have patents and patent pending on now for that technology, and they have further enhanced that technology to the point where they recommended that the technology was ready to move out of the pilot plant stage and into the demonstration plant stage. Let's go to the next slide. Backing up a little bit, this is where it's located. I don't think you need to be told where it is, but it's up in the northeastern corner of Wyoming, near Sundance. That's where the resource is located. We made a decision very, very early on in the project's history that we were not going to try to process chemicals up in the forest. So we decided to locate the process plant near Upton in an industrial park. And that same location where that commercial plant is planned for right now is very, very near the location where the demonstration plant will be located as well. Next slide, please.
Senator Beitman has a question real quick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is awesome. My question on the plant, the processing plant, would it have capabilities of processing uranium since there's uranium nearby up there near Devil's Tower?
Go ahead. You're fine.
The Bear Lodge resource has very little uranium. It has some thorium, and thorium is the radioactive element in the resource. And our technology is going to recover the thorium very early in the stage, concentrate it, and ship it off for eventual storage, disposal at a regulated site someplace.
Okay.
Okay. We think we've got a pretty compelling investment thesis for current shareholders and potential new shareholders and anybody who's interested in funding the project. And these, again, are some of the competitive advantages that our company and the resource have. I mentioned the participation of General Atomics in the project, but there are very few rare earth projects in the world that are surrounded by existing infrastructure, which means capital costs are reduced for the development of the project going forward. And we have that situation with our project up in Sundance and Upton. We've also, I think it's appropriate at this point to mention another major achievement of the company. Back in 2020, General Atomics, Rare Element Resources, UIT, and another firm, which is we call LNV, were approached with the opportunity to put together a proposal to the Department of Energy for potential funding of the demonstration plant. After some significant period of consideration by DOE and additional work by the group or consortium of participates in the project, in October 1st of 2021, General Atomics and Rare Element Resources and the consortium were awarded a $21.9 million grant by the Department of Energy to engineer, construct, and operate the demonstration plant at Upton. The project at Upton, though, is not just $21.9 million of DOE money, of federal money. It's a grant, but we have also at that particular point in time needed to recognize that this arrangement was a 50-50 cost-sharing arrangement with DOE. That meant that DOE was going to provide 50% of the funding, and that Rare Element Resources, the industrial group, was going to have to provide the other $22 million. At the end of last year, we were fortunate, Rare Element Resources was fortunate to be able to go to market and raise $25 million in support of the DOE project, in support of our demonstration project. So the project now has its full cadre, if that's the word you want to use, of the $44 million that are originally has been proposed to the Department of Energy to build and construct the project. And I just would have to say that this is a 50-50 cost sharing arrangement, but it is also a real partnership objective with the Department of Energy. The Department of Energy has made it clear to us that they very much want this project to succeed, as we do. And so we are all working closely with the Department of Energy to keep everybody informed, to move along, to have the necessary meetings, to review design specifications, schedules, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's been a good experience so far. It's if you've spent a lot of time in private industry, you're always kind of surprised at how long things can take if you're working with the federal government. However, we are very fortunate in that General Atomics is very familiar with how you work your way through these kinds of activities with the Department of Energy. And that's been really an excellent outcome for everybody, I believe. Let me talk a little bit about, shift gears for a minute and talk about China. China is clearly on everybody's radar now for some time, and I'm on slide 7, sorry. We have been committed to the Bear Lodge Rare Earth Project for a very long time. And that commitment stems from our belief, even way back then, that it was very inappropriate for China to control the supply of critical materials and the development of the global economy at large. And we felt very strongly about that for a very long time. And China has behaved just as you would expect them to. They have behaved only in their very best own interest. They really do not have any nice thoughts about helping other folks out with regards to this. So we have been watching China closely, as has everybody else now. The pandemic brought to light the issues with dominance of supply chains, but China has dominated the rare earth supply chain for a very long time. But things are changing now, and this is kind of interesting because what we see happening now is the tremendous uptick in demand for rare earth elements and these magnets. And that tremendous uptick in demand is being driven by electric vehicles. It's being driven by wind turbines. It's being driven by military and defense spending. So what's happening now is that China used to control all exports of rare earths. It was the only supplier. But that's not true, quite true anymore, and we're beginning to see movement globally with regards to a lack of critical dominance by the Chinese. But the Chinese are not going to stand still for that. So at the beginning of this year, the Chinese announced that they were going to form a mega firm by combining 3 of their 6 rare earth companies into one very large company, which I'm sure they hope has pricing, can predict prices or force prices. But more important from the Chinese perspective was that this mega firm has strategic implications for the long-term economy of China. In other words, the Chinese no longer intend just to dominate the rare earth industry. The Chinese intend to dominate the electric vehicle industry. The Chinese intend to dominate the wind turbine industry. The Chinese are rapidly escalating their military qualifications these days and just announced a brand new aircraft carrier for the first time just a week or two ago. So the Chinese are shifting from strictly a supply issue and minimizing exports to now demanding everything internally to develop their own internal economy, and the rest of the world, sorry, okay? So this is why we continue to be diligent on the Chinese factor. So
Just a
slide
second.
8, please.
Yeah,
Oh,
go
sorry,
ahead, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I see your slide says China is importing REs. Where are they getting those REs from?
Well,
Not from us, surely.
That's a very interesting question. Rare earths production comes in intermediate forms. From the mine, out of the ground, you can produce what's usually called a concentrate, which is a mixture of all of the different rare earth elements. And that mixture then has to be further refined into the individual rare earth elements, neodymium, praseodymium, dysprosium, terbium, the magnet materials, in order to be valuable as a magnet material, okay? And that part of the business, China totally still dominates, is the refining into those individual rare earth elements. What China does not control so much anymore is what's going over to China in the form of concentrates to be further refined by China, which is exactly what's been happening for some time now. That is not the strategy that we wish to deploy at Rare Element Resources, General Atomics, or the Bear Lodge project. We have opted to go all the way through to the production of the individual rare earth elements and the magnet materials. Okay, thank you for the question. So let's go to slide.
Just one moment, please.
Great.
Yeah,
So-
Representative Burkhardt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Randy, just to be clear, the concentrate produced at the Mountain Pass mine in California, that's going to China to be processed, am I correct?
That is my understanding. I believe that everybody is telling the world that they're going to produce refined products in the United States. But as I understand it, Mountain Pass is still producing concentrates that are going to China for further refining and distribution. I don't know how.
Thank you.
Okay, slide 8. As you might expect, with all of these changes going on in the world, there has been a significant change in the market and prices for rare earth elements. And again, particularly being driven by the magnet materials. This is a trend line of neodymium and praseodymium you see here as of, it says probably say 2021 on your slides, 2022, just recently. And you can see that over the last 8 to 10 years, prices did nothing for that period of time. But then beginning in about January of 2021, prices, as China began to, I believe, lose control over the market in some ways, prices began to escalate very rapidly again. And this happened one other time back in 2010, 2011, when the Chinese cut off supply to the rest of the world. But this trend doesn't look like that. It's not a spike. It's a clear trend in the upward pricing of these materials. And not too long ago, 3 or 4 months ago, rare earth prices hit their highest price in over 10 years. They've come back down a little bit, but now they've steadied out and they continue to move along. It appears right now at a fairly high clip. Okay, I'm going to shift gears again and talk about the demonstration plant. I think we can skip slide 9, and let's go to slide 10. So this is a quick summary of the demonstration plant as it exists today. Located in Upton, we have obtained a longer-term lease on building a facility and land in Upton in the industrial site there. And that will be the location of the demonstration plant. Total cost, again, was $44 million. Half of that money comes from the DOE financial award, and the other half comes from the proceeds of our rights offering. The purpose, well, this is interesting because I heard a couple of comments earlier. We've moved out of the pilot plant stage, at least in our mind, into the demonstration scale. And we feel it's necessary to move through that demonstration scale because this is proprietary technology. And it's just good management to move through these different stages as you move to a full commitment on a commercial scale plant, which could be $200 to $300 million or more. So that's the purpose of the demonstration plant, is to prove up the technology for us. We've already done most of that, but to demonstrate it at a larger scale and to provide information for us with regards to a decision to move to the full-scale plant. The project, the total project is a 40-month project back starting in October 1st of last year. We are in what we call the design procure stage of the project right now. The engineering is being done right now. The procurement stage was not supposed to start quite yet, but as we've all talked about, we are all being hampered by supply chain issues everywhere we turn these days. So we are hoping that what we will be able to do is to advance the procurement stage specifically for the long lead equipment items that we need to get on purchase. And we're working through that process, and we'll have more probably to say about that with regards to the schedule later. The schedule has always provided for approximately 12 months. It may be 9, it might be 8, it might be a little more of operations once the plant is constructed and passes through the milestone of a go, no-go decision. And again, we may or may not operate the plant for the full time. If we know what we know from the operation of the demo plant, then we would be proceeding to the next steps on that. Okay.
Representative, yeah, I have Representative Bear, then I'll come back to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Scott. I just have a question. I think it's appropriate right now to ask it. In this demonstration plant, could you just describe what kind of EPA regulations that you've had to overcome to make this demonstration plant happen? And what do you foresee as being issues when you move out of the demonstration into an actual production plant? And along those lines, is the state's DEQ department involved, and are there, what kind of exceptions are you getting to be able to operate?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative. That's an excellent question. I believe that we solved that problem, at least for the demonstration plant, very early on when we made our proposal. The demonstration plant, although it also has to have an NRC license, okay? Remember, though, that we are only building the plant in Upton. There is no mining that's going to have to take place in order to feed the demonstration plant. And that's because back in 2014, 2015, Rare Element Resources was fully familiar with the resource, and we decided that what we were going to do was we were going to scrape off the top 10 feet of topsoil where we thought the resource was, in particular, one very high-grade zone, okay? And then we went in and excavated about 300 feet of the high-grade material, and that high-grade material with the intention of someday building a demonstration plant. So it's 1,000 tons, and it's sitting on private land now, ready to be transported as feedstock to the demonstration plant. There are no permits required up in the forest for this. We did have to get a road permit, which we've already got, to transport it. But there are no other environmental issues in the forest with regards to this at time. At the site, this is a demonstration scale operation. It's not huge. So we have had to apply for a Nuclear Regulatory Commission application and license to possess source, okay, at that plant. The other decision we made, though, early on in the proposal was that we weren't going to leave anything there. So everything that's processed at the demonstration plant is being transported away from the demonstration plant and will go to one of these permanent storage areas for waste materials, solid waste material, radioactive material, or whatever the case may be. So we've already got the material on site, nothing happening in the forest. Not on site yet, but it will be. And then we have all of the waste material being transported away from the Upton site when we're done, okay? So there's a air permit that will be required from DEQ. There's a stormwater permit that will be required from DEQ. And they've been very helpful so far, and we have said that we're working to provide the engineering figures to support the applications that we will be submitting very shortly.
Okay. Mr. Co-Chair, you had a question?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. Your demonstration plant will produce ND and PR. Will your full-scale plant produce more rare earth elements than that, or just those two?
Mr. Chairman, very good question. Actually, the demonstration plant will be producing, will have the ability to produce other products as well. You really can't produce one or the other unless you stop someplace in the process. The commercial plant will definitely, because there are other valuable materials. We talk about NdPr, but dysprosium, terbium, those are magnet materials as well. Dysprosium, I think, is running for $600 a kilo now, or some god-awful price right now. And we actually have dysprosium in the resource, and we plan to eventually recover it. What we know right now is that although we have not tested it, the technology that we've developed, we don't see any reason why it can't be extended to those other rare earth elements if we decide to.
Good.
Go ahead, Representative Western.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are you guys working with any Wyoming-based companies or subcontractors or, testing facilities or companies throughout this process?
What kind of facilities? I'm sorry.
Are you guys working with any local Wyoming startups or Wyoming companies in the testing capacity or any of that kind of work that you need done for you?
We have in the past, we will in the future. I know that we're working with a number of different companies right now with regards to the permitting process, the development of the NRC process as well. The demonstration plant will have to have an analytical capability on site, okay? And that's because although we're using fairly conventional solvent extraction as part of the proprietary process, there are some key elements of that process that need to be controlled, and we have to be able to get feedback from the analytical capability. Now, as part of that, I don't think there's any doubt that even though this is an activity that's taking place at the site, we will be engaging in other laboratories to provide us with confirmation of the results that we're getting at the site. Thank you. Just a quick comment on page 11. This is proprietary technology. We've spent millions of dollars developing it. We've worked with UIT in Germany to do it. We think it has some advantages with regards to, particularly with regards to capital costs, as compared with conventional solvent extraction processes that some of our competitors use. And you can see just a quick picture of this is the pilot plant that was run over in Germany. Just a small part of the pilot plant that was run over in Germany. And this is as I mentioned, we have received patents on the technology, and we have several patent pendings on the technology as well right now. Okay, page 12. Okay, this is a quick overview of the location. You know where Upton is. You can see the facility that we've leased here now. We were fortunate to find this facility, as otherwise we were planning on building our own, but this facility will work just fine for our project with some modifications with regards to some special equipment that we will have. Slide 13. I think I've covered slide 13 with regards to permitting and licensing. I mentioned we have submitted for the demonstration plant to the NRC an application. The application is in the NRC's hands right now, and their task right now is to rule on whether it is complete. And then I think they have like 60 days to do that. So we're coming up on 30 days left. And once they rule it's complete, that doesn't provide us with the permission to do anything or move forward. So we've got another several months of work with the NRC. But again, we're optimistic that this is a demonstration scale plant. This isn't a large scale operation. And I have to say again that we think NRC is being cooperative with us, at least to this point, and we're optimistic that we'll be able to move through the application fairly quickly. Slide 14. This is just a quick summary of the 1,000-ton bulk sample that we've taken. It shows the work that we did back in 2014. It shows how it's being stored up on private land now under the, we call them burritos. And then it shows the reclamation of the area after we were done. What was interesting about this was the structure of the Bear Lodge deposit is such that the high-grade zones of rare earths are primarily located in dikes that come from underground, deep underground, find their way very close to the surface. And we thought we knew where one of those big dikes was based on our extensive drilling. We were fortunate, we uncovered it, there it was. The average grade of Bear Lodge is approximately 3% total rare earths. The sample that we have now captured and will be processing in the demo plant is approximately 10%. What this tells you is that Bear Lodge has significant capability for production from high-grade zones in the early life of the project, thus further enhancing its economics. Okay, next slide, 15, I believe. This talks a little bit about the schedule, the 40-month schedule. I think I've sort of mentioned that. Initially, the thought was that this was going to be divided into the 3 phases, the design, and engineering, the procurement stage, and then the procurement and construction stage, and then the final year would be for the operation. That's all sort of morphing around as we try to be attentive to the supply chain issues and dealing with them as best we can. So the plant operation right now is scheduled to begin and operate in 2024. We can move on to the next slide, please. Slide 16. We expect to employ approximately 15 people once the plant is in operation. And I have to say that these are likely to be people who have knowledge and expertise, people who have maintenance capabilities for the plant, and people who have provided input into the construction of the plant moving forward. And we will have help from UIT. They will be over here from Germany during the startup of the operation. But this will need to be a group of people with some pretty specific technical skills to be able to operate and maintain this plant. During the construction phase, we expect that we may have as many as 30 people on site to pull together the equipment into its final form. And then at that point, there's a go, no-go decision as to whether we're, with DOE, as to whether we're finalized on that. Slide 17, we can skip that one. Let's go right to slide 18. We've been asked several times by various folks as to whether or not there are ways that the state of Wyoming can participate or help Rare Element Resources move forward with this project. And early on, before we actually had the design representation that we do now, we weren't quite sure. But as the design has come into view more and more, and the infrastructure requirements have come into view more and more, we're pretty sure, because we've had conversations now with WEA, we've had conversations now with WBC, we've had multiple discussions with the town of Upton with regards to their specific infrastructure needs to support the project. We've developed a couple, 3 lists on that over the period of time, and we're, I think, going to be able to hone in on that. Any additional funding or help that is provided by either WEA or WBC, obviously, we believe will support those infrastructure requirements. And we also believe can be utilized for training with the University of Wyoming. We've had conversations with Dr. Krutka and others with regards to participation in the project once we move into the operations stage. So we haven't finalized any of those discussions, but we're talking at length with everybody. We had actually had on our list of things for Upton a fire truck. But I understand that the fire truck has now been funded, so that's not going to be a requirement on our part. But there certainly is emergency fire protection, other environmental issues, other safety issues. All of those are things that we would normally do as part of constructing a plant like this. And we are in constant discussion now with the town of Upton, and we'll be meeting soon with WEA and WBC to see whether or not we can come to a consensus about what we would like to have them all do, and our participation going forward. Chairman Greer mentioned the agreement state amendment and the amendment to the uranium recovery program. We are big fans. We think this is critical, not just to Rare Element Resources and the commercial plant, not the demonstration plant, because we can't do it that fast, but the commercial plant will benefit significantly from making Wyoming an agreement state. We also think that it's very important to the state of Wyoming. We see lots of new investment going into, not lots, but some new investment going into construction and development of rare earth projects, and some of them are in agreement states, such as California, such as Texas, such as Utah. So there's, we think, a real opportunity to really, in our case, it's the timeline. The timeline just absolutely kills us if we have to go through it with on a commercial scale with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And that's not good for anybody, and it's not good for the country, and it's not good for the state of Wyoming when these minerals are critical as they are, and while China keeps moving forward without concern about these kinds of things. So we are big supporters of that moving forward, and we understand that there's a feasibility study underway, and we look forward to hearing the results of that and participating if we can.
Okay, well, thank you.
That is the end of my presentation,
All
Mr.
right.
Chairman.
So committee, any questions? I see Representative Western. Representative Heinert on that one? Okay, we'll go Western and then Bear, okay?
Bear dirty work.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So have you guys had any conversations with the governor's office about becoming an agreement state? Because I believe it's his office that has to initiate that process, if I understand correctly.
We are familiar through our discussions with consultants who work with the state and others, DEQ. We've had conversations with DEQ in the past as well. So I wouldn't say we are anywhere near experts in the drafting of an amendment to handle rare earths from that perspective, but we're knowledgeable.
So Representative Western, I can help because I've been through this, is Senator Rothfuss and Representative Burkhardt, is when we became an agreement state, I said 2013 or 14, we had put together an amendment. DEQ worked on the technical side of that, worked with the NRC. We put a bill draft together. Fortunately, I shifted over to appropriations for 2 years so I could make sure that we could hire the expertise that DEQ needed to be in the office. That'll be one of those considerations. I know Representative Burkhardt was down in the governor's office in full bulldog mode, making sure that the feasibility study was done. And it is being done. And this committee will get a copy of that as soon as it's ready. Our concern will be our timing of how we work on a bill draft so that you have something to work with in the upcoming general session. So does that help with our process or timeline?
Mr. Chairman, so we are an agreement state.
We are
catch that.
already an agreement state. This is an amendment to handle thorium. So our agreement state status deals with the mining right now, which all of that mining, I think all of it is in situ, which is then yellow cake sitting on site. And that's where we end. So it needs to be amended, to be modified to deal with, I'm going to call it a byproduct, not a waste product, okay, of thorium. That help? We'll get that with, we'll have DEQ walk us all the way through that when the time comes. So go ahead, Senator Rothfuss, on that point, and then I'll go to Representative Bear.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just to tack on to that a little bit, the NRC allows states to have primacy over certain aspects of their work, not all of it. There are many aspects of NRC regulation that a state cannot be an agreement state on, where the agreement state basically means we will assume primacy in compliance with your exact letter of interpretation of statute. And so we did that with in situ uranium mining because we took a tremendous amount of testimony that effectively the NRC was leading to additional costs, delayed timeline, and the permitting was just atrocious as a result. So we were allowed to take that. We spent a few years getting to the point where we were able to take that, and then we developed that internal expertise, as the chairman stated, at DEQ, so that we are then in charge of this aspect of what NRC typically regulates. With thorium, we once again have an opportunity a possibility of taking over primacy through the DEQ of managing certain operations and logistics and handling of thorium. And very specifically, it appears that we will be able to, hopefully, develop an agreement state status specifically with the interests of this rare earths operation.
And I will comment further, sorry, Representative Bear. The regulation of the primacy by DEQ is yet another fee-based program, meaning that industry pays for it. Why does industry pay for it? Because it gets done quicker. It's done just as effectively. It just gets done quicker, and time is money. And so when we stood up the agreement state SAS, we in essence, the state of Wyoming, in essence, loaned money to the program to bring in the expertise, worked with industry to recoup that over about a 3-year period. Industry was 100% on board. I'm seeing industry in this sphere shaking their head, yes. So anyway, okay, Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Chairman Greer and Senator Rothfuss, for that explanation of the timeline. That's very helpful. Mr. Scott, you spent some time discussing China and the concern that this country has with their activities in the rare earth element world. What could you tell us, without divulging top secret information, of course, but about our weapon systems in this country and how dependent we are on China to develop these materials so that we can continue producing those arms?
Well, I'm not an expert, but I believe the figures are out there for the F-35 and the amount of rare earth elements that are kilograms that are contained in that state-of-the-art fighter. The Navy, I'm aware, are developing new technologies that will rely partly on permanent magnets. But I'm not the expert, but I know who is. General Atomics is. and they are concerned, I think is the right way to put it. They came looking for us back in 2017 because they have because they're privately held, owned by one man or one family, they have a perspective that is very long-term, rather than the quarter-to-quarter financial reporting that a lot of companies do. And so they made a decision that if they were going to continue to be successful in the programs and the projects and the applications and the equipment that they see as their strength, they needed to do the same thing the Chinese are doing, and that's to shore up the critical supply of these minerals to a domestic or a friendly source.
Thank you.
Yep. Committee, any further questions? Well, we appreciate the update. If you could get us all an element chart. I used to have one, and Senator Bebout took it and never gave it back. You got one?
I can tell you, if you remember your high school chart,
Yeah.
the two lines that are drawn out and pulled down to the bottom, the rare earth elements are the top line.
Really, you got some real colorful ones you
We
could
ought to be
share
able
with.
to find something for you.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Cool. He might have.
Okay, I'll dig it out.
Okay, we'll move on. Is there any public comment on this topic? Okay, well, again, we appreciate your,
Thank you, Chairman.
yeah, appreciate
Thank you, Mr.
appreciate you
Chairman.
taking the time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, all right. So on our follow-up items, one is I think we've got a bill draft that Senator Rothfuss got approved by the committee and for apprenticeships, okay? I think the co-chair and I would like a letter to Rocky Mountain Power that we discussed, and there were several questions, and what I might ask is the committee members that had those questions, Representative Heiner had quite a few, and ask the Rocky Mountain Power, is we could list those out as follow-up items and ask them for that. Could you guys email I think Senator Cooper, you might have had a couple. Email those to Senator Anderson and I. Okay, Representative Western, do you have I can't remember, but there were a handful of questions. I unfortunately didn't write them all down. If you could just get those to us, we'll let them push those up the chain to the extent they can answer them. Yeah.
Just, Mr. Chairman, one of those, I did just want to take a moment and talk about the ammonia question and direct burning of ammonia. That was one that came up, and whether Rocky would look at that. And just as a little bit of background, as an energy product, ammonia is an energy vector, not an energy source. So what that means is it moves energy from place to place, as opposed to being a primary source where coal is going to be a primary source. When you're contemplating Japan, they don't have domestic sources of power. So combustion of ammonia or use of ammonia in some capacity as what they contemplate as an energy source makes sense, because they're going to import whatever it is that they're going to burn anyway. For us, we would literally be using energy to create ammonia at one location, and then you'd travel down the road with that ammonia and you'd burn it again, which is very bad from an economic standpoint and very bad from a thermodynamic standpoint. So we wouldn't do that under any scenario that I could imagine, and particularly since ammonia has so much value for us agriculturally, the idea of it becoming an energy commodity in our country is very limited. So the possibility of producing ammonia here, shipping it overseas, and then selling it to Japan, that's realistic. And it has advantages. Hydrogen serves in the same capacity as an energy vector. Transport of ammonia is a lot easier than transport of hydrogen. So there's some advantages in terms of the infrastructure that you would use for ammonia transport, which is why it's being looked at heavily. And then again, when you combust it, you get back water and nitrogen, assuming you're doing it right. And so from an emission standpoint, it's effectively a zero carbon emission contemplation. But I just wanted to, we discussed it several times today. It came up, and I wanted to provide a little bit of background on that, Mr. Chairman. And I don't know if that answers all the questions, but hope that addresses some.
I'll go, Mr. Co-Chair, and then Representative Heiner.
Mr. Chairman, we may get to see in our lifetime a line that takes ammonia and hydrogen and exports it off the West Coast to various markets. That is an exciting prospect possibly in our lifetime.
Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with the last two speakers. It is a vector rather than a source, but I think we need to pursue multiple paths. We've heard the term all of the above numerous times throughout our tenure. I think this is one of those all of the above. We need to pursue the CCUS path, at the same time pursue the ammonia path and any other paths that may provide an opportunity to develop our resources. And, with the coal is the lifeblood of Wyoming for years and decades in the past, I would like that to continue. And so not only CCUS, carbon capture, but also being able to develop ammonia capabilities to export, in essence, export our coal through ammonia rather than something that we have a blockade on us on our western coast. So I think there's some opportunities to develop both of them concurrently. Let the market decide which is best, but get behind both of them and do what we can to help further that technology.
Mr. Chairman, quick follow-up.
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
And to be clear, ammonia synthesis, there's a lot of economic opportunity, I think, for us on ammonia synthesis. It's just whether we would use ammonia as electrical power generation. I don't see any necessity to pursue that, because whatever we did to generate the power that produced the ammonia, we should have just used the power. Yeah.
The next item I had is our favorite, power zones.
Power zones.
Senator Rothfuss.
Mr. Chairman, my favorite as well. So I've had some discussions with folks about what to potentially bring back, and what I would do then is move to bring legislation that is a further revision of Senate File 71 from the previous year, as well as a draft that provides direct third-party sale behind the meter for consideration at the next meeting. So 2 legislative drafts for us to consider at the next meeting. One of them is the industrial power zone draft. The other is the behind the meter direct sale, third-party generation, which is, both of these have actually already been drafted by Mr. Fuller. And what I would, as part of the motion, suggest is that we circulate it for comment and further revision based on the interests of the committee.
Can I get a second for his motion, and then I'll make some comments? Okay, seconded by Senator Cooper. We need to, Senator Bebout been emailing you or something behind the meter? Okay. You've got 2 bill drafts put together that were private or individual bill drafts. What I'd say is just get those cleaned up, get those to Senator Anderson and I in the next 3 weeks. My goal would be is that we get those drafts to shape the discussion. So in our October meeting, we can discuss those drafts specifically and narrow, while it's been a great discussion overall, I think we need to, with some of the work we're going to have in October, is try to get down to like a 90-minute component of our meeting to work those to see if the committee really wants to take those forward or not. Is that seem fair to you, Senator? Okay.
90 minutes or 9 minutes?
Well, okay. Any further discussion on that proposition? Okay. Sensing you're ready to vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay. Mr. Fuller, do you have enough direction on that?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I do. Only other thing I would add is just direction for the annual cease and transfer bill draft.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, let's get that put out so it's in draft form. So our annual cease and transfer bill, which, so the history on that a little bit, again, Senator Rothfuss and I were on the subcommittee with Senator Coe and Glenn Moniz, yeah. And when we brought that forward, which ended up being, quite frankly, great legislation for the state all the way around, solved a lot of problems, was the proposition that we would regulate how those funds were spent and make sure that DEQ was reporting to us. And that's why we do that bill every year. And because DEQ's been doing a good job with it, it's kind of boring. But nonetheless, it's a good exercise. So the chair would entertain a motion to have a draft for the cease and transfer bill.
So moved.
Second by Duncan. All those in favor? Aye. Okay.
I want to discuss it.
Anything else, Mr. Fuller, that I'm forgetting?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I assume I would work with the 2 of you for the agreement state bill draft, depending on the report.
We may have to, we may have to pull together a Zoom meeting or a meeting in Casper or something for once DEQ gets that feasibility study and review and walk through it. So we may have to do a little extra work.
And Mr. Chairman, in terms of the timing, just based on, I believe, what Mr. Wentland said in April, the draft report would be the end of July, early August. And then I think their plan was to have a final report completed in early September.
Yeah, okay. Yeah,
Would-
go ahead, Sam.
What is that rough draft going to look like? Is that something that we could put legislation together on? Do we have a concept of what Kyle was intending from that? Because I think that timeline sure sounded a lot better than having to start a draft after the final report's released.
Sure the director's updating that. Well, and it was a tight timeline. I mean, you know, but however, I think it's important that you all have a bill and a decent bill to take into the general session.
But if we can do that, and if we can get that information in September, have it ready for our October meeting,
Yeah.
shouldn't be too tight.
Yeah,
And Mr. Chairman, I was just corrected by the good folk, by Ms. Sigmund.
yeah.
August 15th would be the anticipated date for a draft report that DEQ would complete. The product that they would deliver to this committee would be mid-September.
Okay, so mid-September, our meeting's towards the end of October, correct? Okay. Once that comes in, we see what that looks like. We'll decide if we want to, and maybe it's not even, maybe it's just an informal meeting to review that, you know, we can open it up to the public and stuff too. But
And maybe putting together a working group to work on drafting that and do a few revisions, because I mean, my recollection from the previous one was that we did spend a lot of time iterating through that to get it right.
a lot of time, yes.
Yeah, yeah. So I'd be happy to serve on that if we want to put one together.
Yeah, I think we'll just play that by ear right now. And the working group may be just to all those who are interested, just join in when we do it too. So we'll figure it out. We'll get it done. Okay, anything else, committee?
No more questions?
All right, well, with that, we will be adjourned. Our next meeting date is when? I should know this, but I don't.
Mr. Chairman, I believe it's October 27th and 28th,
Okay, and where are we going to meet, Brian?
right here.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. All right, thank you, everyone. We appreciate it. We are adjourned.
Yeah.